The moment Ethan Cole placed his access card on the reception desk and walked away from 7 years of his life, he had no idea that losing everything would be the beginning of something extraordinary. A single father drowning in grief. A ruthless CEO who had forgotten what it meant to be human. And one rainy afternoon that would shatter everything they thought they knew about success, sacrifice, and second chances. This is a story about the courage it takes to fall apart, and the unexpected grace that sometimes catches you when you do. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below so I can see how far this story travels. Hit that like button, and let's dive in together. The rain fell in sheets across the city, turning the streets into rivers of gray that reflected the towering glass buildings like broken mirrors. Inside the headquarters of Tech Vanguard Industries, 43 floors above the chaos below, Ethan Cole stood at his desk for the last time. His hands trembled slightly as he packed the last of his belongings into a weathered cardboard box. 7 years of his life, reduced to a collection of coffee-stained notebooks, a chipped mug that read "World's Best Dad," and a single-framed photograph of his daughter Maya, her gap-toothed smile forever frozen at age 4 before she learned what it meant to lose a mother. The office around him buzzed with the familiar symphony of productivity. Keyboards clicked like rainfall, voices murmured behind glass walls, phones rang with the urgency of deals being made and deadlines being met. But Ethan heard none of it anymore. He was already gone, a ghost walking through a life that no longer fit. "Ethan." The voice cut through his thoughts like a blade. He looked up to find Marcus Chen, his closest friend at the company, standing in the doorway of his cubicle. Marcus's expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes betrayed genuine concern. "You sure about this?" Marcus asked quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "There's still time to—" "There's no time left," Ethan interrupted, his voice hollow. "That's the whole problem, isn't it? There's never any time." Marcus stepped closer, lowering his voice even further. "Look, I know Alexandra came down hard on you last week, but maybe if you just talked to her, explained what you're dealing with. I tried that 6 months ago." Ethan sealed the box with a piece of tape that made a sound like something tearing. "She looked me straight in the eye and told me that personal circumstances couldn't be an excuse for declining performance. That everyone has problems, but professionals find a way to manage them. She didn't mean—" "Yes, she did." Ethan lifted the box, feeling the weight of everything it represented. "And you know what? Maybe she's right. Maybe I'm just not professional enough, not strong enough, not whatever enough to do what needs to be done here." Marcus's face fell. "That's not what I meant." "I know." Ethan managed a weak smile. "But it's what I mean. I've been running on fumes for 2 years, Marcus. Ever since Sarah died, I've been trying to convince myself I could do it all. Be the perfect father, the dedicated employee, the guy who doesn't fall apart. But I'm failing at all of it, and the only thing that matters is Maya." The mention of his daughter's name caused something to shift in Ethan's expression, a flicker of pain so raw that Marcus had to look away. "She woke up screaming again last night," Ethan continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "4th time this week. She dreams that I'm gone too, that she wakes up and there's nobody there. And when I hold her, when I tell her I'm not going anywhere, do you know what she asks me?" Marcus shook his head. "She asked me to promise. A 7-year-old child asking her father to promise he won't die." Ethan's voice cracked. "How am I supposed to make that promise when I'm working 70-hour weeks? When I'm so exhausted I can barely remember to pick her up from school? When I missed her dance recital last month because I was stuck in a meeting that Alexandra insisted couldn't wait?" "Ethan, I'm done, Marcus. I have to be done before there's nothing left of me to give her." The two men stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the decision hanging between them like smoke. Finally, Marcus stepped forward and pulled Ethan into a brief, fierce hug. "You're making the right choice," he said, "even if it doesn't feel like it right now." Ethan nodded, not trusting himself to speak. 20 minutes later, he stood at the reception desk on the ground floor. The receptionist, a young woman named Jennifer, who always had a kind word for everyone, looked up at him with confusion. "Mr. Cole, did you forget something?" "No," Ethan said quietly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his access card, the piece of plastic that had granted him entry to this building every day for 7 years. "I'm just returning this." Jennifer's eyes widened. Oh, I didn't know you were—" She trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. It's okay, Ethan said, placing the card gently on the desk between them. Could you make sure this gets back to HR? Of course. She picked up the card with uncertain fingers, as if it might burn her. Mr. Cole, I just want to say, you were always one of the nice ones. I hope everything works out for you. The simple kindness of her words nearly broke him. Ethan managed to nod his thanks before turning toward the massive glass doors that led to the street. As he pushed through them, the rain hit him like a wall. He hadn't brought an umbrella, hadn't thought that far ahead. The cold water soaked through his shirt within seconds, plastering his hair to his forehead and running down his face like tears he refused to shed. The box in his arms grew heavy with absorbed moisture. Somewhere in the back of his mind, Ethan worried about the photograph of Maya getting damaged, but he couldn't make himself move faster. Each step away from the building felt like walking through concrete. This was it. The moment everything changed. No more steady paycheck, no more health insurance, no more retirement contributions or professional network or clear path forward. Just him, a traumatized 7-year-old, and the rapidly dwindling savings account that stood between them and complete disaster. The rational part of his brain screamed that he'd made a terrible mistake, that he should turn around right now, go back inside and beg for his job back. That pride was a luxury he couldn't afford. But the part of him that had watched his daughter's light dim over the past 2 years, that had seen the way she flinched every time his phone rang, that had held her trembling body through countless nightmares, that part knew he'd already stayed too long. Ethan made it 3 blocks before he had to stop and set the box down on a bus shelter bench. His arms ached. His chest ached. Everything ached. He pulled out his phone with wet, shaking fingers and called the one person who would understand. Ethan? His sister Caroline's voice was bright with surprise. Hey, I wasn't expecting... What's wrong? Of course she could tell. They'd always been able to read each other that way. I quit, he said simply. Silence on the other end. Then, you quit your job? Yeah. Tech Vanguard. The job you've had for 7 years. The one that pays all your bills and provides Maya's health insurance. That's the one. More silence. Ethan could practically hear his sister's mind racing, trying to decide whether to be supportive or practical. Okay, she said finally. Okay, are you okay? No. The honesty felt like releasing a pressure valve. No, I'm really not okay. But I couldn't do it anymore, Caro. I just couldn't. Where are you right now? Bus shelter on 7th Avenue, soaking wet, probably looking like a complete disaster. Stay there. I'm coming to get you. You don't have to... Ethan Michael Colt, you just quit your job in the middle of a rainstorm with a 7-year-old daughter at home. I'm absolutely coming to get you. Do not move. She hung up before he could argue. Ethan sat down on the bench next to his soggy box of belongings and watched the rain pour down around him. Across the street, people rushed past with umbrellas and purpose, all of them heading somewhere important, all of them part of the machinery of the world in a way he no longer was. For the first time in 2 years, Ethan allowed himself to feel the full weight of his exhaustion. Not just the physical tiredness, though that was certainly there, but the bone-deep weariness of trying to be enough for everyone and failing spectacularly at it. He'd failed Sarah by not being able to save her from the cancer that ravaged her body. He'd failed Maya by being too wrapped up in work to notice how badly she was struggling. He'd failed himself by believing he could power through anything if he just tried hard enough. And now he'd failed the basic test of adulthood, maintaining stable employment to provide for his family. The litany of failures played on repeat in his mind, each one cutting deeper than the last. By the time Caroline's battered Honda pulled up to the curb, Ethan was shivering uncontrollably. She jumped out and ran to him, not caring that she was getting soaked too. Jesus, Ethan, you're freezing. She grabbed the box with one hand and his arm with the other, practically dragging him to the car. Get in. We need to get you warm and dry. In the car, she cranked the heat up to maximum and pulled a blanket from the back seat. The same emergency blanket she'd kept there since college, when she used to drive him home from late-night study sessions. Here. She wrapped it around his shoulders. Now tell me what happened. And he did. The whole story came pouring out as she drove through the rain-slicked streets. The meeting with Alexandra where she'd questioned his commitment. The impossible choice between being present for Maya and meeting his work obligations. The final realization that he was sacrificing his daughter's well-being on the altar of a job that would replace him within a week. Caroline listened without interrupting, her hands tight on the steering wheel. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You did the right thing," she said finally. "Did I? Because it doesn't feel right. It feels terrifying. Those aren't mutually exclusive." She glanced at him, her expression fierce with protective love. "Ethan, I've watched you kill yourself trying to be everything to everyone for 2 years. Something had to give, and I'm just grateful it wasn't you. I don't know how I'm going to pay the bills. We'll figure it out. I don't know how I'm going to explain this to Maya. You'll tell her the truth, that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is admit when something isn't working. I don't know how to do any of this, Caro." "I know." She reached over and squeezed his hand. "But you don't have to know right now. You just have to get through today." They picked up Maya from after-school care, and Ethan braced himself for questions. But his daughter just threw herself into his arms with her usual enthusiasm, chattering about a project they were doing in art class. "We're making family trees," she announced as Caroline drove them home. "Mrs. Peterson says we have to draw everyone in our family and write something special about them." Ethan's heart clenched. "That sounds like a great project, sweetheart." "I'm going to draw you and me and Aunt Caroline," Maya counted on her fingers. "And Mommy, because Mrs. Peterson says we can include people who are in heaven too. Is that okay, Daddy?" "That's perfect," Ethan managed, his voice thick. "Oot." That night, after Maya had fallen asleep clutching her favorite stuffed elephant, Ethan sat at his kitchen table and stared at the stack of bills that seemed to mock him with their official letterheads and due dates. Mortgage, $1,847. Utilities, $243. Car payment, $312. Student loans, $428. Groceries, $600, if he was careful. Gas, $120. Maya's therapy, $200, with insurance he no longer had. The number swam before his eyes. He had maybe $8,000 in savings. 2 months, if he was incredibly careful. 3, if he was willing to let some things slide. He opened his laptop and started searching for job postings, but every listing seemed to require either skills he didn't have or a time commitment he couldn't make. The positions that offered flexibility paid barely above minimum wage. The ones that paid decently demanded the same brutal hours he'd just escaped. It was past midnight when he finally closed the computer in defeat. In the darkness of his modest living room, surrounded by Maya's drawings taped to the walls and the remnants of a life he and Sarah had built together, Ethan allowed himself a moment of complete honesty. He had no idea what he was going to do. No plan, no backup, no safety net, just hope, thin and fragile as spider silk, that somehow, some way, things would work out. It would have to be enough. By meant. Meanwhile, across the city, in a penthouse office that overlooked the glittering skyline, Alexandra Whitmore stood at her window and watched the rain fall. She'd been standing there for over an hour, ever since her assistant had quietly informed her that Ethan Cole had submitted his resignation and left the building. Alexandra prided herself on not being the kind of CEO who lost sleep over employee turnover. People came and went. That was the nature of business. If someone couldn't handle the demands of the job, it was better for everyone if they moved on. But something about Ethan's departure sat wrong with her. She thought about the man she'd hired 7 years ago, bright, enthusiastic, brimming with ideas and energy. He'd been one of her best strategic analysts, someone she'd actually considered grooming for a leadership position. And then his wife had died, and everything had changed. At first, Alexandra had been sympathetic. She'd approved his bereavement leave, sent flowers, even attended the memorial service. She understood grief more than most people realized. But as the months stretched on and Ethan's performance continued to decline, her sympathy had hardened into frustration. Everyone dealt with loss. Everyone had personal problems. What separated successful people from everyone else was the ability to compartmentalize, to not let personal issues interfere with professional obligations. Or at least that's what Alexandra had always told herself. She turned away from the window and walked to her desk, where Ethan's personnel file still lay open. She'd been reviewing it earlier, trying to understand what had gone wrong, where she'd miscalculated. The file painted a clear picture. Excellent reviews for the first 5 years, then a sharp decline. Missed deadlines, reduced output, increasingly frequent absences. On paper, it looked like someone who'd simply stopped trying. But Alexandra found herself turning back to the earlier pages, to the performance reviews where supervisors had praised Ethan's creativity, his dedication, his ability to see problems from unique angles. One review, written 4 years ago, caught her eye. Ethan brings a rare combination of analytical thinking and genuine empathy to his work. He understands that behind every data point is a human story, and that understanding makes him invaluable when we're trying to develop products that truly serve people's needs. Empathy. Alexandra sat down slowly, the word echoing in her mind. When was the last time she'd approached a personnel issue with empathy? When was the last time she'd tried to understand the human story behind the declining performance metrics? She thought about the meeting she'd had with Ethan the previous week. She'd called him into her office, presented him with data showing his productivity had fallen by 32% over the past 18 months, and asked him directly if he was still committed to his position at Tech Vanguard. He'd looked at her with eyes that held so much exhaustion it should have been visible from space, and he'd said quietly, "I'm trying my best." And she'd responded, "I need to know if your best is good enough for this company." The words had been designed to motivate, to push him to rise to the challenge. Instead, they'd apparently convinced him to walk away. Alexandra closed the file and rubbed her temples. She had a company to run, hundreds of employees depending on her leadership, investors expecting results. She couldn't afford to second-guess every personnel decision. But she also couldn't shake the image of Ethan's face in that meeting, the look of a man who was drowning and had just realized no one was going to throw him a life preserver. Her phone buzzed. A text from her assistant. Reminder, board meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. They'll want an update on the Q3 initiatives. Alexandra dismissed the notification and returned to the window. The rain had finally started to slow, leaving the city washed clean and gleaming. Somewhere out there, Ethan Cole was beginning the first night of his uncertain future. And for reasons she couldn't quite name, Alexandra found herself hoping he'd land on his feet. The next week crawled by in a haze of rejection and mounting anxiety. Ethan applied to 43 positions in 7 days. He received 3 automated responses thanking him for his interest, 2 immediate rejections citing overqualification, and 38 instances of complete silence. The ones that did respond wanted him to start immediately, work long hours, travel frequently. None of them seemed to understand that single father with primary custody meant he couldn't just drop everything for an overnight business trip or stay until 8 p.m. every night. By day 5, he'd started looking at positions that paid half what he'd been making at Tech Vanguard. By day 7, he was researching the requirements for driving for rideshare companies. Caroline stopped by every evening after work, bringing groceries she claimed were extras from her shopping trip and casseroles she'd accidentally made too much of. Ethan knew what she was doing, and he loved her for it, even as it made him feel like a charity case. "Any bites?" she asked on Thursday evening, finding him hunched over his laptop at the kitchen table while Maya did homework on the floor nearby. "Nothing viable." Ethan closed the computer with more force than necessary. Either they want someone with different skills, or they want someone who can commit to schedules I can't meet, or they're paying so little I'd need to work 3 of them to make rent. Something will come through. Will it? Ethan gestured at the stack of bills that had migrated from the table to the counter and was now threatening to take over the entire kitchen. Because I've got about 6 weeks before I have to start making some really hard choices about which bills to pay and which ones to let slide. Caroline glanced at Maya, who was absorbed in her math worksheet and seemingly oblivious to the adults' conversation. She lowered her voice. "Have you thought about, if you're about to suggest I ask Mom and Dad for money, don't." Ethan's voice was flat. "They already think I made a huge mistake quitting. I'm not going to prove them right by begging for a bailout. It's not begging, it's family. It's humiliation." He softened his tone, seeing the hurt in his sister's eyes. "I appreciate what you're trying to do, Caro. I really do. But I need to figure this out on my own." "You don't have to do everything alone, Ethan." "Don't I?" The words came out more bitter than he'd intended. "Sarah's gone. I'm Maya's only parent. This is on me." Caroline opened her mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. Instead, she reached over and squeezed his shoulder. Okay, but when you're ready to accept help, you know where to find me. After she left, Ethan made dinner, pasta again, because it was cheap and filling and Maya would actually eat it. They sat at the table together, and he listened to her talk about her day with the kind of focused attention he'd never been able to give her when he was working 70-hour weeks. And then Noah said his family is going to Disney World for Christmas, Maya said, around a mouthful of spaghetti. Have you ever been to Disney World, Daddy? Once, when I was about your age. Did you meet Mickey Mouse? I did. Was it magical? Ethan looked at his daughter's hopeful face and felt his heart crack a little. Before Sarah got sick, they'd planned to take Maya to Disney for her 8th birthday. They'd started saving for it, researching which park to visit first, watching YouTube videos of the rides. Those plans were buried in the same grave as his wife. It was pretty magical, he said softly. Maybe someday we'll go together. Really? Maya's eyes lit up. Really? When things settle down a bit? It was a promise he had no idea how to keep, but the joy on Maya's face made it worth the lie. That night, after tucking Maya into bed and reading 3 chapters of her current favorite book, Ethan returned to his laptop and the soul-crushing job search. He was in the middle of filling out yet another application when his phone rang. Unknown number, probably spam, but at this point, he couldn't afford to miss any calls. Hello? Ethan Cole? The voice was professionally pleasant, generic. Speaking. This is Jennifer from HR at Tech Vanguard. I'm calling about some paperwork we need you to come in and sign regarding your departure. Ethan's stomach dropped. The last thing he wanted was to step foot in that building again. Can't you email it to me? I can sign electronically. Unfortunately, these particular documents require wet signatures. It won't take long. Would tomorrow at 2 p.m. work for you? He wanted to say no. Wanted to tell her to mail the damn papers or shove them through a shredder. But he'd worked in corporate America long enough to know that unfinished HR paperwork had a way of causing problems down the line. Fine. 2 p.m. tomorrow. Excellent. I'll let the front desk know you're expected. Have a good evening, Mr. Cole. She hung up before he could respond. Ethan stared at his phone, dreading the thought of walking back into that building. Of facing the people who'd watched him fall apart. Of confirming that he'd really thrown away everything he'd worked for. But he'd survived worse. He'd survived watching his wife waste away in a hospital bed. He'd survived the moment he had to tell his 5-year-old daughter that mommy wasn't coming home. He'd survived 2 years of functioning on autopilot while everything inside him screamed. He could survive one afternoon of signing paperwork. At least, that's what he told himself, as he finally closed the laptop and headed to bed, trying not to think about the dwindling bank account or the unanswered applications or the promises he'd made to his daughter that he had no way to keep. In the darkness of his bedroom, Ethan stared at the ceiling and wondered if there would ever come a day when he didn't feel like he was failing at everything that mattered. The answer, he suspected, was no. But he'd learned to live with that. He'd had to. The following morning arrived with the kind of cruel sunshine that seemed to mock Ethan's situation. He stood in front of his closet, staring at the collection of work clothes that had been gathering dust for the past week, and felt a wave of nausea roll through him. Going back to Tech Vanguard, even just to sign papers, felt like returning to the scene of a crime. Or maybe he was the crime, the evidence of what happened when someone couldn't cut it in the corporate world. He settled on a simple button-down shirt and jeans, a compromise between professional and the fact that he no longer had any reason to impress anyone there. Maya watched him from her spot on his bed, where she was supposed to be getting ready for school. "You look fancy, Daddy," she said, kicking her feet against the mattress. "Just have to go sign some papers at my old office." "The place where you used to work all the time?" "That's the one." Maya was quiet for a moment, her small face serious in the way only children could be when they were processing something important. "Do you miss it?" The question caught him off guard. He sat down next to her, and she immediately climbed into his lap, something she'd been doing more frequently since he'd quit, as if she needed the constant physical reassurance that he was really there. "I miss some things about it," he said honestly. "I miss my friend Marcus. I miss feeling like I was good at something." "You're good at lots of things. You make the best pancakes, and you always know which stuffed animal I'm thinking about, even when I don't say." Ethan smiled despite himself. "Those are pretty important skills." The most important, Maya said with the absolute certainty of a 7-year-old. Then her expression shifted, becoming almost worried. Are you going back to work there? No, sweetheart. I'm just going to sign some papers, and then I'm coming right home. Promise? The word hit him like a fist. She asked him to promise everything now, that he'd pick her up on time, that he wouldn't be late for dinner, that he'd be there when she woke up. Each promise was a small brick in the wall she was building against her worst fear. I promise, he said, holding her tight. I'll be back before you even get home from school. After dropping Maya off, taking the time to walk her all the way to her classroom door, something he'd rarely been able to do when he was working, Ethan drove across the city to Tech Vanguard's headquarters. The building loomed against the blue sky like a monument to everything he'd lost. He sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to summon the courage to go inside. Through the glass walls, he could see people moving purposefully through the lobby, all of them part of something he no longer belonged to. Finally, at 1:58 p.m., he forced himself out of the car. The lobby was exactly as he remembered, all sleek surfaces and ambient lighting designed to make visitors feel impressed and slightly intimidated. Jennifer at the reception desk looked up as he approached, and her professional smile flickered into something more genuine. Mr. Cole, right on time. She typed something into her computer. Actually, there's been a slight change. Ms. Whitmore would like to see you in her office before you handle the HR paperwork. Ethan's stomach dropped. Alexandra Whitmore? The CEO? Yes, sir. She's expecting you on the 43rd floor. This made no sense. CEOs didn't personally meet with former mid-level employees to sign termination papers. They had entire departments to handle that kind of thing. Is there a problem with something? Jennifer's smile remained fixed in place, revealing nothing. I really couldn't say, sir. The elevators are just to your left. The ride up to the 43rd floor felt like ascending to an execution. Ethan watched the numbers climb, each one marking him closer to a conversation he absolutely did not want to have. What could Alexandra possibly want? To personally inform him what a disappointment he'd been? To lecture him one final time about commitment and professional standards? The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, a space Ethan had only visited twice in 7 years. Everything here was quieter, more refined, as if even the air had been curated for people important enough to breathe it. Alexandra's assistant, a polished woman in her 30s whose nameplate read Patricia, looked up from her desk. Mr. Cole, please have a seat. Ms. Whitmore is just finishing up a call. Ethan sat in one of the absurdly comfortable chairs that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage payment and tried to stop his leg from bouncing nervously. Through the partially open door to Alexandra's office, he could hear her voice, crisp and authoritative. I understand your concerns, Richard, but the timeline is firm. If the development team needs additional resources, approve it. I'd rather go over budget than deliver a subpar product. No, that's final. Excellent. Send me the revised projections by end of day. A pause, then her voice shifted into something that might have been humor. Richard, I've been making hard calls since before you graduated business school. Trust me when I say this is the right move. Yes, you too. Goodbye. Moments later, she appeared in the doorway. Ethan, thank you for coming. Please come in. She looked exactly as he remembered. Immaculately dressed in a charcoal suit, her dark hair pulled back in a style that was both professional and severe. Her expression giving away absolutely nothing. But there was something different about her eyes, a quality he couldn't quite identify. Her office was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, and the space itself was decorated with the kind of minimalist elegance that spoke of both wealth and control. A single photograph sat on her desk, a much younger Alexandra with her arm around a teenage boy, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. Please sit. She gestured to a chair across from her desk, then settled into her own seat with the easy confidence of someone who'd sat in that particular chair thousands of times. Ethan sat, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Jennifer said you wanted to see me? I did. Alexandra studied him for a moment, and Ethan fought the urge to squirm under her gaze. How have you been? The question was so unexpected that Ethan actually laughed, a short, bitter sound. I'm sorry, but why am I here? Because I'm fairly certain it's not so you can ask about my well-being. Something flickered across Alexandra's face. Surprise, maybe, or possibly respect. Direct. I appreciate that. You're right, of course. I asked you here because I've been thinking about our last conversation. The one where I questioned your commitment. The one where I quit, you mean? You resigned, she corrected, after I failed to see what was actually happening. Ethan stared at her, completely thrown. This wasn't going at all how he'd expected. I don't understand. Alexandra stood and walked to the windows, her back to him. After you left, something bothered me. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. I told myself it was just standard regret about losing an employee, that I should focus on finding your replacement and move on. She turned to face him, and there was something raw in her expression that Ethan had never seen before, something almost human. But I couldn't move on. So I pulled your file and really looked at it, not as a CEO reviewing metrics, but as a person trying to understand a story. She walked back to her desk and opened a manila folder, his personnel file. May I walk you through what I found? Ethan nodded, too stunned to speak. You were hired 7 years ago. Exceptional performance reviews for the first 5 years. Your supervisor noted that you had an unusual ability to balance analytical rigor with creative problem solving. She looked up. That's not common. Most people excel at one or the other. She flipped a page. Then 5 years in, you took 3 weeks of bereavement leave. When you returned, your work was still solid, but the reviews began noting increased absences, missed deadlines. Over the next 18 months, your performance declined steadily. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. He'd lived through this decline. He didn't need a summary, but Alexandra wasn't finished. What I noticed this time, looking at it properly, were the dates. Your bereavement leave began on March 15th, your wife's death, I assume? March 12th, Ethan said quietly. I took a few days before the leave officially started. And the pattern of absences that followed, they correlate with a child's school schedule, early arrivals, late departures, taking leave during winter and spring breaks. She closed the folder. You weren't slacking off, Ethan. You were trying to be a single parent while maintaining a full-time job that demands 60-plus hours a week. I was failing at both, Ethan said, his voice flat, which is why I left. You weren't failing. You were drowning, and I didn't throw you a life preserver. I questioned whether you were trying hard enough. Alexandra sat down, and for the first time since he'd known her, she looked almost uncertain. I owe you an apology. Ethan felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. I'm sorry, what? I'm apologizing. I handled your situation poorly. I made assumptions about your commitment without understanding what you were actually dealing with. That was a failure of leadership on my part. You're the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, Ethan said slowly, trying to process what was happening. You don't owe me anything. I couldn't meet the job requirements, so I left. That's how this works. Is it? Alexandra's voice was sharp. Because I've been running this company for 12 years, and I've built it on the principle that our people are our greatest asset. But if I'm losing good employees because I can't see past productivity metrics to the actual human beings behind them, then I'm not leading well. She stood again, moving to the window, her silhouette framed against the sprawling city. I lost my younger brother when I was 28, David. He was 16, bright, full of life. Car accident on a Tuesday afternoon, gone before the ambulance arrived. Ethan's breath caught. He hadn't known. I was working at a hedge fund at the time, climbing the ladder as fast as I could. When David died, I took exactly 1 week off. Then I came back and threw myself into work harder than ever. 80-hour weeks, weekends, holidays. I told myself I was honoring his memory by being successful, by not letting his death derail my life. She turned back to face him. But the truth is, I was running. From the grief, from my family, from everything that reminded me of what I'd lost. Work became my fortress. And over the years, I convinced myself that's what strength looked like. The ability to compartmentalize, to function despite personal tragedy. That's what everyone says, Ethan said. Keep calm and carry on. Don't let them see you sweat. The show must go on. Yes, and it's complete bullshit. The profanity sounded strange coming from her, almost liberating. Because 20 years later, I'm the CEO of a successful company, and I haven't had a meaningful relationship in a decade. I see my parents twice a year. I can't remember the last time I did something just because it made me happy rather than because it advanced my career. She walked back to her desk and picked up the framed photograph. This was taken 6 months before David died. We were at our family's lake house. He just pulled off some ridiculous water ski trick and was so proud of himself. I barely remember this day because I spent most of it on my phone, dealing with work emails. Alexandra set the photo down gently. I built my entire life on the belief that work was the answer, that success could fill the void. And when I saw you struggling, I projected that belief onto you. I thought if I pushed you hard enough, you'd find the same salvation in work that I thought I'd found. But I didn't, Ethan said softly. No, because you made a different choice. You chose your daughter over your career. You chose presence over productivity. And instead of recognizing that as strength, I saw it as weakness. The office fell silent except for the quiet hum of the city below. Ethan didn't know what to say. This conversation had veered so far from what he'd expected that he felt like he was in a different building entirely. "Why are you telling me this?" he finally asked. Alexandra met his eyes directly. "Because I want to offer you a different kind of position, one designed around the life you need to live, not the life I think you should live." "I don't understand." She returned to her chair, and suddenly the uncertain woman was gone, replaced by the decisive CEO. Tech Vanguard is launching a new division focused on long-term strategic development. Instead of the constant sprint of quarterly deliverables, this team will work on 18-month to 2-year projects. Major initiatives that require deep thinking rather than rapid execution. She pulled out a document and slid it across the desk. "I want you to head that team. Remote work, flexible hours, deliverables-based rather than time-based. You'd report directly to me, meet in person once a month, and otherwise work from wherever you need to be. The salary is 15% less than what you were making, but the benefits package is better, and there's an education fund for Maya." Ethan stared at the document without picking it up. "This doesn't make any sense. You're offering me a promotion after I quit?" "I'm offering you a role that plays to your actual strengths while acknowledging your actual life. You're one of the best strategic thinkers I've ever worked with, Ethan. The projects you developed in your first 5 years here generated millions in revenue. But you can't think strategically when you're constantly putting out fires and working 60-hour weeks. There are probably 100 people who could do this job without the complications I bring. Maybe. But they're not who I want. I want someone who understands that business decisions affect real people with real lives. Someone who won't lose sight of the human element in pursuit of the bottom line." She leaned forward. "I want someone who had the courage to walk away when the cost became too high, because that kind of integrity is exactly what this role needs." Ethan finally picked up the document, his hands trembling slightly. The title read Director of Strategic Development. The salary was more than enough to cover his bills with room to spare. The benefits included health insurance, education assistance, and something called family support services. "What's this?" He pointed to the last item. "Something new I'm implementing across the company. Childcare assistance, emergency backup care, counseling services, educational support, the kind of infrastructure that helps employees actually manage their lives instead of just surviving them. Because of me? Because of a lot of people like you who've been struggling in silence. You were just the one who finally made me see it." Alexandra's voice softened. "I can't give you back the time you lost, Ethan. I can't undo the stress of the last 2 years. But I can offer you a path forward that doesn't require you to sacrifice your daughter on the altar of your career." Ethan read through the document again, looking for the catch. This was too good, too perfect. There had to be something he was missing. "Why now?" he asked. "Why did it take me quitting for you to see any of this?" "Because I'm not as good at this as I pretend to be." Well, Alexandra's smile was self-deprecating. "I've spent 20 years building walls around myself and calling it strength. It took watching someone else choose differently to realize what I'd actually built was a prison." She stood, extending her hand across the desk. "Think about it. Take the weekend. But Ethan, whatever you decide, I want you to know that walking away from this office last week wasn't failure. It was one of the bravest things I've seen anyone do." Ethan shook her hand, still feeling like he'd stepped into an alternate reality. "I need to understand something. Is this offer because you genuinely think I can do this job, or because you feel guilty about how things ended?" Both, she said without hesitation. The guilt made me look closer. But what I saw when I really looked is someone with rare talent who'd been trying to swim with weights tied to his ankles. I'm not offering you charity, Ethan. I'm offering you a chance to do what you do best without the constraints that were killing you. I'll need to think about it. Of course. My direct number is on the last page. Call me with any questions. Ethan walked out of that office in a daze. The HR paperwork that had been the ostensible reason for his visit was handled in 15 minutes by a different Jennifer, this one from actual HR, who seemed completely unaware of the bombshell that had just been dropped in his lap. He made it to his car before the shaking started. Ethan sat behind the wheel, staring at the document Alexandra had given him, and felt tears stream down his face. Not sad tears, not happy tears, just the overwhelming emotional release of a man who'd been holding himself together with duct tape and pure will for too long. A job. A real job with flexibility and benefits and salary enough to support his family. After a week of terror and rejection and slowly mounting panic, someone was offering him exactly what he needed. It felt like a miracle. It felt like a trap. It felt like both at once, and Ethan had no idea which instinct to trust. He drove home on autopilot, his mind spinning through possibilities and doubts in equal measure. By the time he pulled into his driveway, he'd talked himself into accepting the offer 3 times and talked himself out of it twice. Caroline was waiting on his front porch, looking concerned. "You were supposed to text me when you were done. I was about to send out a search party." "Sorry, lost track of time." He climbed out of the car, still clutching the job offer. "What's that?" "The reason I'm losing my mind." He explained everything over coffee at his kitchen table. Alexandra's apology, the story about her brother, the impossible job offer that seemed designed specifically for him. Caroline listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from shock to hope to cautious skepticism. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "So, what's the problem?" she finally asked. "This sounds perfect." "That's the problem. It's too perfect. Things don't work out like this, Caro. You don't quit your job in a dramatic gesture and then get offered an even better position a week later. That's not how real life works." "Maybe it is. Maybe you just haven't seen it happen before. Or maybe this is Alexandra trying to assuage her guilt by creating a position that'll quietly disappear in 6 months, and I'll be out of a job again, except this time I'll have turned down all the other opportunities I could have been pursuing." Caroline reached across the table and grabbed his hands, forcing him to look at her. "Listen to me, Ethan Michael Cole. For 2 years, I have watched you run yourself into the ground trying to do the impossible. For 2 years, you've been waiting for the other shoe to drop, for everything to fall apart, for the universe to confirm that you're not allowed to have good things because Sarah died, and somehow that means you need to suffer forever. That's not... Yes, it is. And I get it. Trauma makes us expect disaster. But what if this isn't disaster? What if this is just a decent person trying to do something right after realizing she did something wrong? She's a CEO, Caro. CEOs don't create positions out of guilt. Maybe not, but they do create positions when they recognize talent they don't want to lose." Caroline squeezed his hands. "Read that offer again, really read it. Does it sound like charity, or does it sound like a job description?" Ethan pulled out the document and forced himself to read it objectively. The responsibilities were substantial: developing long-term growth strategies, identifying emerging markets, building frameworks for sustainable innovation. It was complex work that would require every bit of his analytical ability. "It's a real job," he admitted, "with real expectations and real accountability, which means if she didn't think you could do it, she wouldn't offer it. Alexandra Whitmore didn't build a billion-dollar company by making emotional hiring decisions. So you think I should take it? I think you should stop looking for reasons to say no and ask yourself what you actually want." What did he want? The answer should have been simple. But Ethan had spent so long in survival mode that he'd forgotten how to think beyond the next immediate crisis. "I want Maya to be okay," he said finally. "I want to give her a stable life. I want to be present for her, not just physically there, but actually present." "Can this job give you that?" "On paper, yes. Flexible hours, remote work, deliverables instead of FaceTime. It's designed for exactly what I need." "Then what are you afraid of?" The question hit him like a punch. What was he afraid of? Failure, obviously. Taking the job and proving that he couldn't handle it. Letting Alexandra down. letting Maya down, letting himself down. But underneath all that was something deeper, the fear of hope. Because if he let himself hope that things could actually work out, and then they didn't, the fall would destroy him. "I'm afraid of believing this is real," he whispered. Caroline's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, honey, I know, but you can't protect yourself from disappointment by refusing every good thing that comes your way." "I can try. And you'll succeed. You'll successfully ensure that you never get hurt again by making absolutely certain you have nothing left to lose." Is that really what you want? Is that what you want to teach Maya, that the best way to survive is to expect nothing? Ethan closed his eyes. He thought about his daughter, about the way she asked him to promise things constantly, because she'd learned too young that people could disappear. Did he want to teach her to live defensively, to never trust that good things could happen? Or did he want to show her that sometimes, after everything falls apart, there's a possibility of rebuilding? "I hate it when you're right," he said. "I know, it's one of my most annoying qualities." Caroline stood and kissed the top of his head. "Call her, Ethan. Say yes. And if it falls apart, we'll deal with it together. But give it a chance." After she left, Ethan sat alone in his kitchen as the afternoon light faded into evening. He read the job offer one more time, this time without looking for traps or hidden catches, just reading it for what it was, an opportunity. Before he could overthink it further, he pulled out his phone and dialed the number on the last page. Alexandra answered on the second ring. "Ethan, that was faster than I expected. I have questions." "Of course. Ask anything. This family support initiative you mentioned, is it really happening, or is it something you're planning that might not materialize?" "It's already in motion. I've allocated budget, hired a director to oversee it, and we're rolling it out in phases over the next 6 months. You'd be eligible for all services immediately." "And the remote work?" "That's not going to become a situation where I'm technically allowed to work from home but constantly called in for in-person meetings. The monthly meeting is mandatory. Everything else is at your discretion. If you want to come in more often, you're welcome to. If you never want to see the office, except once a month, that's also fine." "What happens if I take this job and you decide in 6 months that it's not working?" Alexandra was quiet for a moment. "Then we'll have a conversation about what's not working and see if we can fix it. But Ethan, I don't make offers I'm not prepared to honor. This isn't a charity position created to make me feel better. It's a role I genuinely need filled by someone with your capabilities. Why do I feel like there's something I'm not seeing?" "Because you've been conditioned to expect the worst. That's not paranoia. It's pattern recognition based on experience. But not every situation has to follow the same pattern." Ethan took a deep breath. "I need one promise from you." "Name it." "If this stops working, if I'm not delivering what you need, or if the flexible arrangement isn't sustainable, or if anything changes, you tell me directly. No passive-aggressive performance reviews, no subtle hints, just straight conversation." "You have my word." "Then I accept. I'd like to take the position." He could hear the smile in Alexandra's voice. "Excellent. I'll have HR send over the formal paperwork tomorrow. Can you start 2 weeks from Monday? That'll give you time to get organized and give me time to brief you properly on the first project." 2 weeks from Monday works." "Welcome back, Ethan. I think this is going to be good for both of us." After they hung up, Ethan sat in the growing darkness of his kitchen and let himself feel it. Not happiness exactly, but relief so profound it was almost painful. He had a job. A good job. One that wouldn't require him to choose between his career and his daughter. For the first time in a very long time, the future looked like something other than an endless series of impossible choices. When Maya came home from school, chattering about her day, Ethan swept her up in his arms and spun her around until she shrieked with laughter. "Daddy, why are you so happy?" "Because I got a new job, sweetheart, a really good one." "Does that mean you won't be sad anymore?" The question pierced him. He set her down gently and knelt to her level. "I'm still going to have sad days sometimes. Missing Mommy doesn't just go away, but I'm going to have a lot more happy days now, starting with today." Maya threw her arms around his neck. "I like happy days." "Me too, baby girl, me too." That night after Maya was asleep, Ethan stood at his bedroom window and looked out at the quiet street. Everything was exactly the same as it had been this morning. Same house, same neighborhood, same small life. But everything felt different. He thought about Alexandra's story. about her brother and the fortress she'd built out of work and achievement, about how she'd mistaken survival for strength, isolation for independence. He'd been heading down the same path, telling himself he had to do everything alone, that accepting help was weakness, that grinding himself down to nothing was somehow noble. But maybe strength wasn't about standing alone. Maybe it was about knowing when to accept the hand extended toward you, even when you weren't sure you deserved it. Ethan pulled out his phone and sent a text to Caroline. "I said yes. Thank you for making me see straight." Her response came immediately. "I knew you would. Proud of you, little brother." Then another text. "Now, get some sleep. You've got 2 weeks to figure out how to be a strategic director, whatever the hell that means." Ethan smiled and was about to put the phone away when one more message came through, this one from Marcus. "Heard through the grapevine you're coming back. Different role, but still. Coffee next week?" So word was already spreading through Tech Vanguard. Ethan wondered what the rumor mill was saying, probably that he'd begged for his job back or that Alexandra had taken pity on him. He didn't care. Let them think whatever they wanted. He knew the truth, that sometimes life knocked you down so hard you couldn't see any way back up, and sometimes, if you were incredibly lucky, someone noticed you were down there and actually reached out to help. Not because they had to, but because they'd learned the hard way what it costs to leave people drowning. Ethan typed back to Marcus, "Coffee sounds great. I'll fill you in on everything." Then he finally allowed himself to believe it was real, all of it. The job, the second chance, the possibility that maybe, just maybe, things were going to work out after all. In the morning, he'd tell Maya the details. They'd celebrate with pancakes and probably too much syrup. He'd start planning how to set up his home office and figure out childcare for the monthly in-person meetings. But tonight, he just stood at the window and felt the weight he'd been carrying begin to lift. Not all the way. He was still a widower raising a traumatized child, still someone learning to navigate single parenthood, still scared of 1,000 things he couldn't control. But for the first time in 2 years, he wasn't also terrified about how to pay next month's bills. And that was enough. With the news over breakfast, and she'd responded by insisting they needed a celebration meal, which apparently meant breakfast food at 7 in the morning, despite the fact that it was Saturday. "So you're going back to work, but you're staying home?" Maya asked around a mouthful of pancake, her logic trying to reconcile two seemingly contradictory facts. "Sort of. I'll have an office here, in the spare room, and I'll go into the big building once a month for meetings, but mostly I'll be here, working while you're at school and done by the time you get home." "Every day?" "Most days. Some days I might need to work a little longer, but not like before." Maya considered this, her small face serious. Then she reached across the table and grabbed his hand with her syrup-sticky fingers. "Will you still walk me to school?" "Every single morning. And read me stories at bedtime?" "As many as you want. Even the long ones? Especially the long ones." She nodded, satisfied with these assurances, and returned her attention to drowning her pancakes in more syrup. Ethan watched her and felt something in his chest unclench. This was what Alexandra had offered him. Not just a job, but the ability to make promises to his daughter and actually keep them. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Ethan transformed the spare room, which had been serving as a catch-all storage space, into a functional home office. Caroline helped him paint the walls a calm blue-gray and install shelves for the books and files he'd need. Marcus stopped by one evening with his old ergonomic chair from Tech Vanguard, claiming he'd upgraded and would have thrown it out otherwise, though Ethan suspected that was a lie designed to spare his pride. "So you're really doing this," Marcus said, helping him set up the desk they'd bought from a secondhand furniture store. "Coming back to the madhouse." "Different wing of the madhouse, apparently." "Still, I didn't think I'd see you in that building again." Marcus tested the stability of the desk, then nodded approval. "How are you feeling about it?" Ethan paused in the middle of connecting his laptop to the new monitor. "Terrified, mostly. What if I can't deliver? What if this whole thing falls apart in 3 months and I'm back to square one, except now I've burned through what little savings I have left? And what if it works out exactly like it's supposed to?" "It seems statistically unlikely," Marcus laughed. "Man, you really did get beaten down, didn't you?" The old Ethan wouldn't have hesitated for a second. He'd have seen the opportunity and grabbed it with both hands. The old Ethan had a wife and a stable life and didn't know how fast everything could disintegrate. Fair point. Marcus sat on the edge of the desk. But the old Ethan also didn't have Alexandra Whitmore personally invested in his success. You know what the rumor mill is saying? I'm afraid to ask. That she created this entire division specifically because she realized she'd screwed up with you. That the family support initiative exists because you walking out made her take a hard look at how the company treats people with actual lives outside of work. Ethan felt his face heat. That's ridiculous. I'm not that important. Maybe not. Or maybe you were just the catalyst for something she'd been thinking about anyway. Either way, you've got the CEO herself making sure this works. That's not nothing. After Marcus left, Ethan stood in his new office and tried to imagine himself working here every day. The room was small but efficient, with a window that looked out onto the backyard where Maya's plastic slide sat surrounded by weeds he kept meaning to pull. It wasn't impressive or sophisticated, but it was his. His first official day arrived with the kind of anxiety that made Ethan's hand shake as he poured his coffee. Maya noticed because she noticed everything now. "Are you nervous, Daddy?" "A little bit. About your new job?" "Yeah." She came over and hugged his waist, her head barely reaching his ribs. "You're going to be great. You're the smartest daddy in the whole world." "You might be biased." "Nope. It's a fact." I checked. He walked her to school as promised, then returned home to face his new office with the kind of trepidation usually reserved for dental procedures. At exactly 8:30, his laptop chimed with an incoming video call from Alexandra. Her face appeared on screen, and she was smiling, a real smile, not the professional one he was used to seeing. "Good morning, Ethan. Welcome to your first day. How's the home office setup?" "Functional. Not as fancy as the 43rd floor, but it has a better view of the weeds in my backyard." She laughed. "I'm sure it's perfect. Ready to dive in?" For the next 2 hours, Alexandra walked him through his first major project, developing a comprehensive strategy for Tech Vanguard to enter the sustainable technology market. The scope was massive, requiring analysis of emerging trends, competitive landscape assessment, potential partnership opportunities, and long-term revenue projections. "This is easily 6 months of work," Ethan said, his mind already organizing the project into phases. "I'm giving you 8 months. Quality over speed. I want you to think deeply about this, not just deliver the first viable strategy you can piece together." "And I'm leading this alone?" "You'll have access to our research team for data collection, and you can pull in consultants as needed. But the strategic thinking is yours. That's what I'm paying you for, your brain, not your ability to manage a team or sit in meetings." After they hung up, Ethan sat staring at the project brief she'd sent over. It was substantial, complex, and exactly the kind of work he'd loved in his early years at Tech Vanguard, before the grief and exhaustion had turned every task into an insurmountable obstacle. He opened a blank document and started outlining his approach. The words came slowly at first, rusty from disuse, but gradually, like a muscle remembering its purpose, his analytical mind began to engage. He mapped out research phases, identified key questions that needed answering, sketched preliminary frameworks for evaluating opportunities. When the alarm on his phone went off at 3 o'clock, his reminder to stop work and prepare for Maya's arrival home, Ethan looked up in genuine surprise. 5.5 hours had passed in what felt like minutes. He'd been so absorbed in the work that he'd forgotten to be anxious about whether he could do it. That evening, Caroline called to check in. "How was day 1 of the new career?" "Surprisingly good, actually. The project is massive, but it's interesting. The kind of thing I used to love working on." "Used to?" "Still love, apparently. I got lost in it today. In a good way." "That's wonderful, Ethan. See? You were worried for nothing." "It's been 1 day, Carol. Let's not start celebrating yet." But despite his caution, Ethan went to bed that night feeling something he hadn't felt in years: professional satisfaction. The sense that he'd spent his day doing something worthwhile that also used his actual skills. The first month passed in a rhythm that gradually became routine. Ethan worked while Maya was at school, stopped at 3 to be present for her afternoon, and occasionally logged back on after her bedtime if he wanted to finish a thought. The flexibility was strange at first. He kept expecting someone to question why he wasn't online at specific times or demand he attend meetings on short notice. But Alexandra had been true to her word. She checked in once a week via video call to discuss his progress, offered feedback that was direct but constructive, and otherwise left him alone to work. The monthly in-person meeting at headquarters was scheduled well in advance, allowing him to arrange childcare with Caroline without panic. The other employees in the Strategic Development Division, there were eventually 3 others hired to work on different long-term projects, communicated primarily through email and occasional video conferences. No one seemed bothered by the remote arrangement or treated it as unusual. It was during his second monthly in-person meeting that Ethan got his first real glimpse of how much had changed at Tech Vanguard. He arrived at 9 for his 10 o'clock meeting with Alexandra and decided to grab coffee from the employee break room on the 10th floor where his old team had been located. Marcus had mentioned meeting him there, and Ethan was curious to see familiar faces. The break room had been renovated since he'd left. Where there had once been a single coffee maker and a refrigerator that constantly smelled faintly of old leftovers, there was now a full cafe setup with an espresso machine, comfortable seating areas, and a wall of windows overlooking the city. Marcus spotted him first. "Ethan, man, you actually showed up in person. I was starting to think you'd become a myth." "Very funny. This place looks completely different. Part of the great Tech Vanguard Reformation. You heard about the family support initiatives? I'm using them, remember? Childcare assistance has been a lifesaver." "Right. But there's more now. They added backup emergency care, extended parental leave, flexible scheduling for anyone who needs it. And get this, they hired someone whose entire job is helping employees navigate work-life balance issues." A woman Ethan didn't recognize joined them, holding a coffee that looked more like dessert. "Are you Ethan Cole?" Yes?" She extended her hand. "Jennifer Park. I'm on the HR team handling the new family support programs. I've heard a lot about you." "That sounds ominous." "Actually, it's all good. You're kind of legendary in our department, the person whose situation made Ms. Whitmore realize we needed to completely overhaul how we support employees. Half the programs we're implementing came directly from examining what would have helped in your case." Ethan felt his face flush. "I don't know if I'm comfortable being the poster child for corporate dysfunction." Jennifer laughed. "Think of yourself more as the catalyst for positive change. The feedback we're getting from employees has been overwhelmingly positive. People are actually talking about their lives outside of work now, without fear of being seen as uncommitted." After she left, Marcus elbowed him gently. "See, you're a revolutionary. Who knew that quitting in a rainstorm would spark a corporate culture shift? I just wanted to be there for my daughter." And Alexandra apparently wanted to make sure other people in your situation wouldn't have to make the same impossible choice. That's pretty significant, Ethan. The meeting with Alexandra that morning covered his progress on the sustainable technology project, but toward the end, she shifted the conversation in an unexpected direction. "I wanted to talk to you about something else," she said, leaning back in her chair. "The Family Support Initiative has been running for 3 months now, and the response has exceeded my expectations. But I'm getting feedback that some employees are still hesitant to actually use the programs." "Why?" "Fear mostly. Fear that taking advantage of flexible scheduling or using the childcare assistance will be seen as a lack of dedication. That they'll be passed over for promotions or given less important work. That's a reasonable fear, given how corporate culture usually works." "Exactly. Which is why I want to do something visible to demonstrate that using these programs doesn't limit career advancement." She paused. "I want to profile several employees who are successfully balancing flexible work arrangements with strong performance. With your permission, I'd like you to be one of them." Ethan's stomach dropped. "You want a what?" "A company-wide email, maybe a feature in our internal newsletter. Nothing excessive, just an honest conversation about how the flexible arrangement has affected your work and your life. Show other employees that it's not only acceptable, but supported from the highest level." "Alexandra, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I really don't want to be the face of this. It's personal." "I understand, and if you're truly uncomfortable, I won't push. But think about it. How many other single parents are working here right now, terrified to ask for what they need because they've seen what happens to people who can't maintain the traditional schedule? How many of them would feel more confident advocating for themselves if they saw that someone else had done it successfully?" She had a point, and Ethan hated that she had a point. He thought about the other parents at Maya's school, the ones who always looked exhausted and stressed at pickup, who talked in hushed voices about choosing between work meetings and school events. "Can I think about it?" "Of course." Let me know by the end of the month. That evening, Ethan discussed it with Caroline over dinner while Maya played in the next room. I don't want to be some kind of symbol, he said, pushing food around his plate. I just want to do my job and raise my daughter without being held up as an example. Why not? Because it's private. Because I don't want everyone knowing about Sarah and Maya and how badly I was struggling. Because it feels exploitative, even if that's not how Alexandra means it. Caroline set down her fork. Can I tell you what I think? I have a feeling you're going to anyway. When Sarah died, do you remember how many people came out of nowhere to help us? Neighbors bringing meals, parents from Maya's preschool organizing a meal train, complete strangers donating to the fundraiser for medical bills. Of course I remember. Do you remember how angry you were at first? How you didn't want to accept any of it because you saw it as charity? Ethan winced. He did remember. The rage he'd felt at needing help, at being seen as someone who couldn't handle his own life. Eventually, you let people help, Caroline continued. And you know what happened? Some of those people told me later that it made them feel better, that being able to do something concrete in the face of tragedy helped them process their own fears about loss. Your willingness to accept help actually helped other people. This is different. Is it? Or is it just another opportunity for your pain to serve a purpose beyond just hurting? You can keep it private and protect yourself, and that's completely valid. Or you can be honest about your experience and maybe make it easier for the next person who's drowning. Neither choice is wrong, Ethan, but don't say no just because you're afraid. He thought about it for 3 days. Thought about the relief he'd felt when Alexandra offered him the flexible position. Thought about how different his life would be if she hadn't recognized what he needed. Thought about all the people still suffering in silence, convinced that admitting struggle meant admitting weakness. Finally, he called Alexandra. I'll do it, but I want editorial approval on anything that gets published, and I don't want to talk about Sarah's death specifically, just about being a single parent. Agreed, thank you, Ethan. This matters more than you know. The interview was conducted by the head of internal communications, an earnest woman named Rachel, who assured him she'd handle the story with sensitivity. She asked about his daily routine, how he balanced work and parenting, what the flexible arrangement had made possible. Ethan answered honestly, talking about walking Maya to school every morning, about being able to attend her parent-teacher conferences without having to choose between them and work obligations, about the mental space that came from not constantly operating in crisis mode. What would you say to other employees who are afraid to ask for flexibility? Rachel asked. Ethan thought carefully before answering. I'd say that you can't be your best at work if you're falling apart everywhere else, and that asking for what you need isn't weakness. It's actually the responsible thing to do, both for yourself and for the company, because you'll do better work when you're not constantly drowning. The article was published 2 weeks later in the company newsletter. It was tasteful, focusing on the practical aspects of the flexible arrangement rather than the trauma that had necessitated it. There was a photo, Ethan had reluctantly agreed to one, of him in his home office, looking reasonably professional despite the children's drawings visible on the wall behind him. The response was immediate and overwhelming. His work email filled with messages from other employees, some thanking him for speaking up, others sharing their own struggles, a few asking specific questions about how he'd navigated requesting the flexible arrangement. One message, from a woman named Susan in the accounting department, particularly struck him. I've been considering quitting because I can't figure out how to manage my mother's declining health and my job responsibilities. Reading your story made me realize I don't have to choose. I have a meeting with HR next week to discuss options. Thank you for showing me it was possible. Marcus called him that evening. Dude, you're trending in the company Slack channels. People are actually having productive conversations about work-life balance instead of just complaining about deadlines. I'm not sure how I feel about being a trending topic. Feel good about it. You know how many people you just gave permission to advocate for themselves? That's not nothing. But the most unexpected response came 3 days after the article published, when Ethan's laptop chimed with a video call request from an internal number he didn't recognize. A man appeared on screen, mid-40s, wearing glasses, looking nervous. Hi, I'm David Chen. I work in product development. I hope it's okay that I'm calling you directly. I got your contact from the company directory. It's fine. What can I help you with? I read your article about the flexible arrangement. David paused, seeming to gather courage. My son has autism. He's 8. And his school keeps calling because he's having behavioral issues, and I keep having to leave work to deal with it, and my manager is getting frustrated, and I don't know what to do. Ethan's heart clenched. Have you talked to HR about flexibility options? I'm afraid to. What if they see it as me not being committed? What if it affects my career progression? I'm up for a promotion next quarter, and if I start asking for special accommodations, it's not special accommodations, Ethan interrupted gently. It's accessing benefits that exist specifically for situations like yours. And if the company is serious about this initiative, which they seem to be, then using it shouldn't hurt your career. But what if it does? What if it doesn't? What if you keep running yourself into the ground trying to do the impossible and you burn out completely and then you're no good to your son or your job? David was quiet for a moment. That's what my wife keeps saying. Your wife is smart. Look, I can't promise it'll all work out perfectly, but I can tell you that asking for help was the hardest and best decision I made. And Alexandra, Ms. Whitmore, she genuinely seems to want this to work. They talked for another 20 minutes, Ethan sharing what the process had been like for him, what questions to ask HR, how to frame the conversation with his manager. By the end, David looked less terrified and more determined. Thank you, he said. Really. Just knowing someone else navigated this successfully makes it feel less impossible. After they hung up, Ethan sat in his office and realized what Caroline had meant. His struggle could serve a purpose beyond just surviving it. By being willing to be visible in his imperfection, he'd made it safer for others to be imperfect too. The realization was both humbling and terrifying. That weekend, Ethan took Maya to the park, something he'd rarely had energy for in the old days. She ran ahead to the playground while he found a bench in the shade, watching her climb and swing with the kind of carefree joy that had been missing for so long. Another parent sat down next to him, a woman with tired eyes and coffee that had clearly gone cold hours ago. Your daughter? The one scaling the climbing structure like a tiny ninja? Yeah, that's Maya. The woman smiled. She's fearless. Mine's the one on the swings who's insisting she can touch the sky if she just goes high enough. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the way parents do when they're all too exhausted for actual conversation. Can I ask you something? The woman said suddenly. How do you do it? The balance thing. I'm looking at you, and you seem calm and present, and I feel like I'm barely holding it together most days. Ethan almost laughed. You're seeing me on a good day. Most days I'm held together with coffee and the desperate hope that I don't forget something crucial. But you're here, on a Saturday, at the park, not catching up on work or running errands or doing one of the million things that always need doing. I'm here because I nearly lost this, Ethan said honestly, gesturing to Maya. Not lost her physically, but lost the connection. I was so busy trying to provide for her that I forgot to actually be with her. It took hitting rock bottom to realize I had to change something. The woman nodded slowly. I'm getting close to that bottom. Then change something before you hit it. Whatever you think you can't afford to let go of, your career trajectory, other people's expectations, the idea that you have to be perfect at everything, it's not worth your relationship with your daughter. Nothing is. That's easy to say. It's the hardest thing I've ever said, and it cost me everything I thought I'd built, but I got this instead. He nodded toward Maya, who was now attempting to teach another child how to do a proper cartwheel. And this is better. The woman was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, Thank you. I needed to hear that from someone who's been there. She gathered her daughter and left, and Ethan wondered if she'd actually make changes or if she'd just keep pushing until something broke. He hoped for the former, but suspected the latter was more likely. Change was terrifying. He knew that better than anyone. Maya ran over, breathless and grinning. Daddy, did you see my cartwheel? It was perfect. It was pretty spectacular. Can we get ice cream? It's not even noon yet. But it's Saturday. Saturday is for doing things that don't make sense on regular days. Ethan laughed and stood up. You know what? You're absolutely right. Saturday is for ice cream before lunch. They walked to the ice cream shop 2 blocks away, Maya's small hand in his, and Ethan thought about all the Saturdays he'd missed, all the moments he'd sacrificed for a job that would have replaced him without hesitation. He couldn't get those moments back. but he could make sure he didn't miss the ones ahead. At the ice cream shop, Maya ordered chocolate with rainbow sprinkles, and Ethan got vanilla because some things never changed. They sat at a small table by the window, and Maya kicked her feet happily while destroying her cone with the intensity only a 7-year-old could bring to ice cream consumption. "Daddy?" "Yes, sweetheart? Are you happy now?" The question hit him square in the chest. He looked at his daughter's face, sticky with chocolate and utterly sincere, and felt tears prick his eyes. "Yeah, baby, I'm getting there." "Good, because when you're happy, your face looks different, less tired." "I feel less tired." "Because of your new job where you stay home?" "That's part of it, but mostly because I get to spend more time with you." Maya considered this while licking chocolate off her fingers. "I like when you're home. The house feels less empty." Ethan reached across the table and wiped a smear of chocolate from her cheek. "I like when I'm home too." That evening, after Maya was asleep, Ethan sat in his office and looked at the project he'd been working on. The sustainable technology strategy was coming together beautifully. He was ahead of schedule and genuinely excited about the recommendations he was developing. But more than that, he was excited to present them, to show Alexandra that her faith in him hadn't been misplaced, to prove to himself that he could do meaningful work without sacrificing everything else. His phone buzzed with a text from Alexandra. "Board meeting next week. Would like you to present preliminary findings on the sustainability project. Are you comfortable with that?" His immediate instinct was to panic. Present to the board? That was high stakes, high pressure, exactly the kind of thing that used to send his anxiety through the roof. But then he thought about how much had changed. He wasn't operating on 3 hours of sleep anymore. Wasn't constantly worried about missing a call from Maya's school. Wasn't trying to do the impossible while pretending everything was fine. He was rested, prepared, and actually confident in his work. He texted back, "Yes, send me the details." Her response was immediate. "Excellent. You're going to be great." Ethan looked around his small home office with its secondhand furniture and view of the overgrown backyard. It wasn't impressive by any conventional measure, but it was his space, earned through the hardest decision he'd ever made and the grace of someone who'd learned to see past her own blind spots. From the bedroom down the hall, he could hear Maya's quiet breathing, the sound of his daughter sleeping safely and peacefully in a home where her father was actually present. This was success, not the corner office or the prestigious title or the salary that impressed people at dinner parties. This was what winning actually looked like. The board presentation loomed exactly 1 week away, and Ethan found himself lying awake at 2 in the morning, running through scenarios in his head. Not anxious scenarios like he would have imagined a year ago, more like a chess player thinking through possible moves and counter-moves. He'd prepared meticulously. His sustainable technology strategy was solid, backed by extensive research and clear financial projections. The recommendations were bold, but achievable, exactly the kind of forward-thinking approach Alexandra had hired him to develop. But presenting to the board meant facing a room full of people who measured success in quarterly earnings and stock prices. People who might not understand why tech vanguards should invest heavily in long-term sustainability initiatives when short-term profits were already strong. Ethan rolled over and checked the time on his phone. 2:17. Maya would be up in 4 hours, expecting pancakes and her father's full attention before school. He forced himself to close his eyes and breathe deeply, using the meditation techniques Sarah's therapist had taught him years ago. Sleep eventually came, restless and full of half-formed dreams about standing in front of blank presentation screens while faceless executives asked questions he couldn't answer. Morning arrived too quickly. Maya bounced into his room at 6:30, already dressed, and chattering about the field trip her class was taking to the Natural History Museum. "Mrs. Peterson says we're going to see real dinosaur bones, Daddy, real ones that are millions of years old. Did you know that some dinosaurs were as big as buildings?" "I did know that," Ethan said, hauling himself out of bed. "What kind of dinosaur are you most excited to see?" "The T-Rex, obviously. It's the best one." "Obviously." They made it through breakfast and the walk to school without Ethan's distraction becoming too obvious, though Maya did ask him twice if he was okay. "Just thinking about work stuff, sweetheart. Nothing to worry about." "Is it the big meeting?" He'd mentioned the board presentation in passing, not realizing she'd been paying attention. "Yeah, it's the big meeting." You're going to do great, she said with absolute confidence. You're the smartest daddy in the whole world, remember? I checked. After dropping her off, Ethan spent the day refining his presentation slides and rehearsing his talking points. By evening, he had the whole thing memorized so thoroughly that he could have delivered it in his sleep. Caroline came over for dinner, ostensibly to help, but really to make sure he wasn't spiraling into anxiety. You've got this, she said, watching him pace around the living room while Maya colored at the kitchen table. Alexandra wouldn't have asked you to present if she didn't think you were ready. What if they hate it? What if they think the whole sustainability angle is a waste of resources? Then you defend your position with the data you've collected. That's literally your job, Ethan. You're the strategic director. Strategy sometimes means advocating for things that aren't immediately popular. I haven't done anything like this in over 2 years. What if I've lost... Stop, Caroline interrupted firmly. You haven't lost anything. You've been doing brilliant work for the past 4 months. This presentation is just you showing them what you've been doing. Nothing more, nothing less. She was right, intellectually. But the gap between intellectual understanding and emotional confidence felt vast. The night before the presentation, Ethan tucked Maya into bed and read her 3 chapters of her current favorite book, a fantasy story about a girl who discovered she could talk to animals. Daddy? Maya asked as he was closing the book. Yeah? Are you nervous about tomorrow? A little bit. It's a pretty important meeting. She reached out and grabbed his hand. When I get nervous about things, Mommy used to tell me to pretend everyone in the room was wearing silly hats. Does that help? Ethan felt his throat tighten. He hadn't realized Maya still remembered specific things Sarah used to tell her. That's very good advice. I'll try that. And remember that I'm proud of you no matter what happens. The words, so mature coming from a 7-year-old, nearly broke him. He leaned down and kissed her forehead. Thank you, baby girl. That means everything. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, more than all the stars. And all the dinosaurs? And all the dinosaurs. The next morning, Ethan put on his best suit, the one he'd worn to job interviews back when he thought his career was over, and checked his appearance in the mirror. He looked professional, competent, like someone who belonged in a boardroom. He just wished he felt that way. Caroline arrived at 7 to stay with Maya until the school bus came, hugging him tightly before he left. You've got this. Go show them what you're made of. The drive to Tech Vanguard's headquarters was surreal. Ethan had made this drive hundreds of times during his 7 years at the company, but this felt different. He wasn't going as a mid-level employee trying to survive another day. He was going as the director of strategic development, presenting work he genuinely believed in to people who held the company's future in their hands. The board meeting was scheduled for 9. Ethan arrived at 8:15, giving himself time to set up and settle his nerves. Alexandra found him in the empty conference room, running through his slides one final time. How are you feeling? She asked. Somewhere between cautiously optimistic and completely terrified. She smiled. That sounds about right for your first board presentation. Want to know a secret? Always. Half of them will be checking their phones. 2 of them will definitely fall asleep during the financial projections section. And at least one will ask a question that makes it obvious they weren't paying attention to anything you said. Ethan laughed despite his nerves. That's supposed to make me feel better? It's supposed to remind you that they're just people. Powerful people with important titles, yes, but still just people who put on pants one leg at a time and occasionally forget where they park their cars. Oh, did you really just use the pants one leg at a time metaphor? I did. And I stand by it. You know your material, Ethan. You've done exceptional work on this project. Just present it clearly, answer their questions honestly, and trust that you belong in that room. Do I belong in that room? I wouldn't have asked you to present if you didn't. The board members began arriving at 8:45. Ethan watched them file in. Men and women in expensive suits carrying expensive briefcases, all of them exuding the kind of effortless authority that came from years of making decisions that affected thousands of lives. Alexandra introduced him simply. This is Ethan Cole, our Director of Strategic Development. He's been leading our analysis of opportunities in the sustainable technology sector. Ethan, the floor is yours. And just like that, it was time. Ethan took a breath, thought about Maya telling him to imagine everyone in silly hats, and began. Good morning. Over the past 4 months, I've been conducting a comprehensive analysis of the sustainable technology market, evaluating tech vanguard's potential entry points and long-term positioning. What I'm about to present isn't just a business opportunity, it's a fundamental shift in how we think about technology's role in addressing global challenges. He clicked to the first slide showing projected growth rates for sustainable tech sectors. The sustainable technology market is currently valued at approximately $400 billion globally. Conservative projections suggest it will reach $1.2 trillion within the next decade. That's not just growth, that's explosive expansion driven by regulatory pressure, consumer demand, and the simple reality that current approaches are unsustainable. One of the board members, a silver-haired man whose nameplate read Richard Paulson, leaned forward. Those numbers assume continued government support and subsidy programs. What happens when political winds shift? It was exactly the question Ethan had anticipated. Excellent point. I've actually modeled 3 different scenarios, one assuming continued support, one assuming moderate reduction in incentives, and one assuming a significant pullback. Even in the most conservative scenario, the market still shows substantial growth, driven primarily by corporate adoption rather than government mandate. He clicked through the next several slides, walking them through his analysis of competitive landscape, potential partnerships, and Tech Vanguard's specific advantages in the space. The board members asked questions, some sharp and challenging, others more exploratory. Ethan answered each one, drawing on the months of research he'd conducted. When he didn't know something, he said so honestly and explained how he'd go about finding the answer. When he disagreed with an assumption embedded in a question, he pushed back respectfully but firmly. 40 minutes into what was supposed to be a 30-minute presentation, Ethan reached his recommendation slide. Based on this analysis, I'm proposing a 3-phase approach. Phase 1 involves strategic partnerships with existing sustainable tech companies, allowing us to enter the market with minimal capital investment while building expertise. Phase 2 focuses on internal R&D, developing proprietary solutions that leverage our existing technological advantages. Phase 3 is market expansion and scaling. He paused, making eye contact with several board members. This is a 5-year initiative with an estimated initial investment of $200 million. The projected ROI over 10 years is 32%. But more importantly, it positions Tech Vanguard as a leader in a sector that will define the next generation of technological innovation. Another board member, a woman named Catherine Liu, spoke up. That's a substantial investment with a relatively long payback period. Why should we commit that kind of capital to an emerging market when our core business is already highly profitable? This was the fundamental question, the one everything hinged on. Ethan had known it was coming. Because markets don't stay stable forever, he said. Our core business is built on technologies that, frankly, won't be relevant in 20 years. We're successful now, which gives us the luxury of investing in the future from a position of strength rather than desperation. Companies that wait until their current revenue streams are threatened before diversifying rarely survive the transition. He clicked to his final slide, which showed a timeline of technology companies that had failed to adapt to market shifts. These companies were all industry leaders who assumed their dominance was permanent. They had the resources to pivot, but waited too long to do it. I'm not suggesting we abandon our core business. I'm suggesting we ensure we have a viable core business 20 years from now. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Richard Paulson started clapping slowly. That's either very brave or very foolish, telling a room full of people invested in the current business model that it has an expiration date. It's honest, Ethan said simply, which is what you're paying me for. If you wanted someone to tell you everything is fine and we should just keep doing what we're doing, you wouldn't have created a strategic development position. Several board members laughed. Alexandra was smiling. Catherine Liu nodded thoughtfully. I appreciate the directness. I'd like to see more detailed financial modeling on the Phase 1 partnerships before we make any commitments, but the overall strategy is sound. The discussion continued for another 20 minutes, with board members debating various aspects of the proposal. Ethan answered questions, clarified points, and occasionally conceded when someone raised a valid concern he hadn't fully addressed. Finally, Alexandra stepped in. I think we have enough to move forward with deeper analysis. Ethan, excellent work. Board members, let's take a 15-minute break and then move on to the next agenda item. As the room cleared, several board members approached Ethan directly. Richard Paulson shook his hand firmly. You've got guts, kid. I like that. Keep pushing us. We need people who aren't afraid to tell us uncomfortable truths. Catherine Liu handed him her business card. If you ever need an outside perspective on the financial modeling, feel free to reach out. I spent 20 years in sustainable tech before joining this board. Happy to be a resource. After they'd all left, Alexandra leaned against the conference table and grinned at Ethan. Well, that went well. Did it? I basically told them their entire business model has an expiration date. And you backed it up with data and sound reasoning. That's exactly what they needed to hear. Trust me, Ethan, you just earned a lot of credibility in that room. I thought I was going to throw up for the first 10 minutes. Couldn't tell. You looked completely composed. She gathered her own materials. Take the rest of the day off. You've earned it. Ethan drove home in a daze, his mind replaying moments from the presentation, things he could have said better, questions he'd answered well, the moment when he'd seen several board members nodding along with his arguments. He'd done it, actually done it, stood in front of some of the most powerful people in the company and defended work he believed in. And he'd done it while knowing that in a few hours he'd be walking Maya home from the school bus and helping her with homework and reading bedtime stories. The presentation was important, but it wasn't everything. It was just one part of a life that was finally starting to feel balanced. Maya burst through the door at 3:30, full of stories about dinosaur bones and her friend Emma, who'd gotten scared of the giant T-Rex skeleton. It was so big, Daddy, like bigger than our house, and it had these huge teeth, and the museum lady said it could bite through bones like they were crackers. That sounds terrifying and awesome. It was both. How was your big meeting? It went really well, actually. Did you do the silly hats thing? I did. It helped. She beamed with pride. Mommy's tricks always work. That evening, after Maya was in bed, Ethan received an email from Alexandra. The subject line read simply, board feedback.
Yeah, you up?
He opened it with trepidation, but the message was brief and positive. Unanimous approval to move forward with Phase 1 analysis. Several board members specifically mentioned being impressed with your presentation. Richard Paulson called you refreshingly honest for someone who wants to keep their job. High praise from him. Well done, Ethan. You're exceeding every expectation. Ethan read the email 3 times, letting the reality sink in. He'd actually pulled this off. The job that had seemed like an impossible gift 4 months ago was proving to be exactly what both he and Tech Vanguard needed. His phone rang. Caroline. How'd it go? I've been checking my phone obsessively all day. It went well, really well. They approved moving forward with the project. Ethan, that's amazing. See? I told you that you'd be brilliant. I'm still processing the fact that I didn't completely fall apart up there. Maybe because you are not actually falling apart anymore. Maybe because you finally got a life that doesn't require you to be in constant crisis mode. She was right. The difference between this presentation and the ones he'd struggled through 2 years ago wasn't just preparation or importance. It was that he'd walked into that boardroom as someone who'd slept reasonably well, eaten breakfast with his daughter, and wasn't operating in a state of perpetual exhaustion and grief. Recovery wasn't linear. He still had hard days. Still woke up sometimes thinking about Sarah and feeling the loss like a fresh wound. Still worried about whether he was doing right by Maya, whether he was enough for her. But the constant drowning sensation was gone, replaced by something that felt almost like solid ground. The following week settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable in a way Ethan's life hadn't felt in years. He worked on the detailed Phase 1 analysis, coordinating with potential partner companies and running financial models. Maya continued therapy, which was now fully covered by the improved benefits package, and slowly began having fewer nightmares. One afternoon in late October, Ethan was deep in research when Maya came running into his office, waving a piece of paper. Daddy, look, I got picked. Picked for what? The school play. We're doing a show about the seasons, and I'm going to be Autumn. I get to wear an orange costume and throw leaves and everything. Ethan felt a surge of joy so pure it almost hurt. That's wonderful, sweetheart. When's the performance? November 15th. It's on a Thursday night at 7. Can you come? Of course I'll come. I wouldn't miss it for anything. Promise? There was that word again. But this time, Ethan could make the promise without the hollow fear that work would get in the way. I promise. I'll be in the front row. The delight on Maya's face was worth every difficult moment that had led to this point. November 15th arrived with Maya vibrating with nervous excitement. Ethan took the afternoon off, one of the advantages of his flexible arrangement, to help her get ready and calm her pre-performance jitters. What if I forget my lines? She worried, fidgeting with the orange costume that made her look like a tiny, adorable autumn leaf. Then you make something up. No one in the audience will know the difference. What if I trip? Then you get up and keep going. Everyone trips sometimes. What if... Maya. Ethan knelt down to her level. You're going to be amazing, and even if something goes wrong, I'm going to be proud of you. Because you're brave enough to get up on that stage in the first place. She threw her arms around his neck. I'm glad you're going to be there, Daddy. Me too, baby girl. The school auditorium was packed with parents and siblings, everyone clutching programs and phones ready to record every moment. Ethan found a seat in the third row. Front row had been claimed by very dedicated parents who'd arrived 30 minutes early and settled in. The lights dimmed. The play began. Maya was luminous. Her part was small, a few lines about leaves falling and preparing for winter, but she delivered them with such earnest conviction that several parents around Ethan smiled. When she threw the handful of fabric leaves into the air as part of her choreographed movement, she did it with such enthusiasm that half of them landed in the audience. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. Not sad tears. Not even particularly happy tears. Just the overwhelming emotion of being present for a moment he would have missed in his old life. After the performance, Maya ran off the stage and directly into his arms. Did you see me? Did you see my part? I saw everything. You were perfect. I messed up one of the leaf throws. They weren't supposed to go in the audience. That was my favorite part. Very avant-garde. She giggled, not knowing what avant-garde meant, but recognizing the approval in his voice. As they were leaving the auditorium, Ethan noticed several other parents glancing at him. A few smiled in recognition. It took him a moment to realize they probably knew him from the company newsletter article. Word had spread beyond Tech Vanguard. Apparently, the story had been picked up by a few business publications as an example of progressive corporate culture. One mother approached tentatively. Excuse me, are you Ethan Cole? I think I read an article about you. Possibly, Ethan said, suddenly self-conscious. I just wanted to say thank you. I've been struggling to balance my career and my kids, and seeing that it's possible to ask for flexibility without sacrificing everything really helped. I talked to my employer about a modified schedule, and they were actually receptive. That's wonderful. I'm glad it helped. More than helped. Changed my life, actually. So thank you for being willing to share your story. After she walked away, Maya tugged on his sleeve. Why did that lady thank you? Because sometimes when you tell the truth about hard things, it helps other people who are going through hard things too. Is that why you talked about me in the article? Ethan paused. He'd tried to keep Maya's involvement minimal in the newsletter piece, but she'd still been mentioned as the reason he needed flexibility. I talked about being your dad, yeah. Is that okay? Maya considered this seriously. I guess so. If it helped people, Mommy always said helping people was the most important thing. She was right about that. They went for ice cream to celebrate. Saturday rules applied to Thursday nights when your daughter had just been autumn in the school play, and Maya talked nonstop about the performance, already planning improvements for next year's play. Watching her animated face across the table, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt since before Sarah died. Not happiness exactly, though that was part of it. More like contentment. The sense that his life, while not perfect or easy, was heading in the right direction. His phone buzzed with a text from Alexandra. Saw the school play reminder on your calendar. How did Maya do? He typed back, she was brilliant. Stole the show as Autumn. Excellent. Enjoy the evening. See you at next week's meeting. The fact that his CEO knew about his daughter's school play and actively encouraged him to attend it still felt surreal. But it was the kind of surreal Ethan was learning to accept as his new normal. That weekend, Caroline came over for dinner and found Ethan in unusually good spirits. You're humming, she observed. You never hum. Am I? Didn't realize. What happened? Did the sustainability project get approved for the next phase? Not yet, but that's looking promising. No, I don't know. Things feel good right now. Stable. Like I'm not waiting for the other shoe to drop anymore. Caroline smiled. That's called healing, Ethan. That's what it looks like when you've actually dealt with trauma instead of just white-knuckling through it. I'm still sad sometimes. About Sarah. Of course you are. You'll probably always be sad sometimes, but that's different from the drowning feeling you had before, right? Yeah, now it's more like, I can miss her and still be okay. I can remember her and smile instead of just feeling like my chest is caving in. That's progress. Real, significant progress. Maya wandered in from the living room where she'd been working on a new drawing. Daddy, can I show Aunt Caroline my picture? Of course. She held up a drawing that showed 3 figures, 2 adults and a child, standing in front of a house. The child was holding hands with both adults. Above them, a bright yellow sun beamed down. That's me and Daddy and Mommy, Maya explained. Mommy's in heaven, but I put her in the picture anyway because she's still part of our family, even though we can't see her. Caroline's eyes filled with tears. Ethan felt his throat tighten. That's beautiful, sweetheart, Caroline said. Can I keep this one? Okay, I can make another one for our fridge. After Maya left to start on the replacement drawing, Caroline turned to Ethan. She's going to be okay. I know. Some days I actually believe it. And you're going to be okay too. Yeah, I think I am. It was the first time he'd said that out loud and actually meant it. The next morning brought another email from Alexandra, this one with an attachment. Thought you might be interested in this. Shows the impact of the initiatives you helped inspire. The attachment was an internal survey of employee satisfaction, comparing results from 6 months ago to current numbers. The increases were substantial, particularly in areas related to work-life balance, company culture, and feeling valued as a whole person rather than just a productivity unit. There was a note at the bottom in Alexandra's handwriting. Turns out treating people like humans instead of resources is actually good for business. Who knew? Thank you for forcing me to see what I'd been missing. Ethan saved the email, not because he needed the validation, but because it represented something larger than his individual experience. It was evidence that speaking up about struggle could create ripples far beyond your own life. That afternoon, he received a call from David Chen, the father who'd reached out months ago about his autistic son. I wanted to give you an update, David said. I talked to HR like you suggested. They set me up with a flexible schedule that lets me handle my son's school situations without constantly scrambling. And I got the promotion. David, that's fantastic. I wouldn't have had the courage to ask if I hadn't read your story and then talked to you. You literally changed the trajectory of my career and my relationship with my son. I just wanted you to know that. After they hung up, Ethan sat in his office and thought about the strange chain of events that had led to this moment. How his worst experience, losing Sarah, falling apart, hitting rock bottom, had somehow transformed into something that helped other people. It didn't make the pain worth it. Nothing would ever make losing Sarah worth it. But it gave the pain a purpose beyond just hurting. And maybe that was enough. Winter arrived early that year, bringing with it the kind of cold that made Maya insist on wearing 3 layers to school despite Ethan's assurances that her classroom would be heated. They'd developed a morning routine that Ethan had come to treasure. Breakfast together, the walk to school with Maya chattering about whatever had captured her imagination that day, and the quiet moment at the classroom door where she'd hug him tightly before running off to join her friends. It was during one of those December mornings, frost crystallizing on the grass, and their breath-forming clouds in the air, that Maya asked the question that had apparently been building for weeks. Daddy, are we poor now? Ethan nearly stumbled. What? No, sweetheart. Why would you think that? Emma's mom said that people who work from home instead of going to offices are usually poor or don't have real jobs. And you work from home. Ethan felt a flash of anger at Emma's mother and her casual judgment, but he kept his voice calm. Emma's mom doesn't know what she's talking about. I have a very real job. I just do it from our house instead of a big building downtown. That doesn't make me poor. It makes me smart enough to find a job that lets me walk you to school every morning. Oh, Maya processed this. So we're okay? We're more than okay. We're good. And we're not going to lose our house or anything? The question pierced him. She was 7 years old and already carrying adult anxieties about financial stability. Sarah would have known exactly what to say, how to reassure her without dismissing her concerns. Ethan knelt down on the cold sidewalk, not caring about the ice seeping through his jeans. Maya, look at me. We are not going to lose our house. We have enough money for everything we need and some things we want. My job pays me well, and I'm good at it. You don't need to worry about grown-up stuff like that, okay? But what if something bad happens again? Like with Mommy? There it was. The real fear underneath the question about money. Not poverty, but loss, the terror that had been her constant companion since Sarah died. If something bad happens, we'll deal with it together, just like we always do. But right now, today, we're safe. Our house is safe. I'm here and I'm healthy and I'm not going anywhere. Promise? I promise to do everything in my power to be here for you. That's a promise I can make and keep. She hugged him so tightly he could barely breathe, right there on the sidewalk 3 blocks from school. When she finally let go, her eyes were wet, but she was smiling. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, baby girl. More than all the stars and all the dinosaurs combined. After dropping her off, Ethan walked home through the cold morning air and felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a familiar coat. Maya was healing, but the process was slow and nonlinear. Every time he thought they'd turned a corner, something would remind him that trauma didn't have a clean timeline. But they were moving forward. That was what mattered. Back at his desk, Ethan dove into the final phase of the sustainability project analysis. The board had approved additional funding for deeper research, and he'd spent the past month conducting detailed assessments of potential partner companies. Today, he was scheduled to present his findings to Alexandra in their regular monthly meeting. The video call connected promptly at 10. Alexandra appeared on screen, looking more relaxed than Ethan had ever seen her. She was in her office, but her usual severe suit had been replaced by a cashmere sweater, and her hair was down instead of pulled back in its typical strict style. Good morning, Ethan. How's the final analysis coming? Finished it last night, actually. I think you're going to like what I've found. Show me. He walked her through his recommendations. 3 strategic partnerships that would position Tech Vanguard perfectly in the sustainable technology market. Each partnership brought different strengths. One company's cutting-edge solar technology, another's expertise in sustainable supply chains, and a third's revolutionary approach to electronic waste recycling. The combined investment is lower than our initial projections, Ethan explained, because we can leverage existing infrastructure from the partners instead of building everything from scratch. And the timeline to profitability is actually shorter than the conservative estimates I presented to the board. Alexandra studied the financial models, her expression thoughtful. This is excellent work, Ethan. Truly exceptional. I'm forwarding this to the board this afternoon with a strong recommendation to proceed. You think they'll approve it? After your presentation last month? They'd be fools not to. Richard Paulson has been emailing me weekly asking when we're going to move forward with your plan. She paused. I wanted to talk to you about something else, though. Your role. Ethan's stomach dropped. Here it was, the moment when she'd tell him this arrangement wasn't working after all, that they needed someone in the office full-time, that flexibility had its limits. Okay, he said carefully. You've exceeded every expectation I had when I created this position. The sustainability strategy is just one example. You're also the driving force behind our improved employee culture, whether you realize it or not. People look to your example. They see that it's possible to do exceptional work while also having a life outside these walls. Thank you, but I want to expand your role. Not the hours, she added quickly, seeing his expression. The scope. I want you to mentor other employees who are developing strategic initiatives. Share your analytical framework. Help them think long-term instead of just quarter to quarter. You'd still work primarily from home, still have the flexibility you need, but you'd also have the opportunity to shape how this company thinks about innovation. Ethan stared at her. That sounds like a promotion. It is a promotion. Director of Strategic Innovation, with a commensurate salary increase and expanded benefits. You'd be reporting directly to me, just like now, but you'd also have a small team working with you on various initiatives. A team means management responsibilities, meetings, coordination. A small team, carefully selected with the understanding that flexibility is built into the culture. Weekly video check-ins, quarterly in-person gatherings, deliverables-based assessment. I'm not asking you to return to the grind, Ethan. I'm asking you to help me build something better. He should have been thrilled. This was recognition of his work, validation that his approach was valuable, but all he could think about was Maya asking him to promise he wouldn't disappear. "Can I think about it?" he asked. "Of course. Take a week. Talk it through with your family. But Ethan, this offer isn't because I feel guilty about how things went before. It's because you've proven you're exactly the kind of leader this company needs. Someone who understands that sustainable business isn't just about environmental impact. It's about building a workplace where people can actually sustain themselves." After the call ended, Ethan sat in his office and stared at the wall where Maya's drawings were taped, colorful scenes of their life together, happy memories rendered in crayon and construction paper. A promotion, more money, more influence, more responsibility. Everything his younger self would have jumped at without hesitation. But his younger self hadn't known what it cost to sacrifice presence for prestige. That evening, he discussed it with Caroline over the phone while Maya was at a playdate with Emma. The same Emma whose mother had made the snide comment about working from home, though Ethan had decided to be the bigger person and not mention it. "It sounds like an incredible opportunity," Caroline said. "What's holding you back?" "Fear that it's the beginning of the slippery slope, that it starts with mentoring a small team and ends with me back at 70-hour weeks and missing Maya's life." "Has Alexandra given you any reason to think that's where this is heading?" "No, she's been nothing but supportive of the boundaries I've set." "Then what's this really about?" Ethan was quiet for a long time. "I'm scared that if I say yes to anything beyond what I'm doing now, I'm betraying the choice I made. The choice to put Maya first, to prioritize presence over achievement." "Ethan, accepting a promotion doesn't mean you're abandoning your priorities. It means you're being recognized for living them successfully. You've proven you can do exceptional work while being an exceptional father. This is Alexandra acknowledging that and wanting to help other people learn how to do the same thing." "What if I can't handle it?" "Then you'll tell Alexandra and adjust. But what if you can? What if this is exactly what you're supposed to be doing, not just for yourself, but for all the other people struggling to figure out how to have both a career and a life?" Her words echoed in his mind after they hung up. He thought about David Chen and the anonymous woman at the school play, and the dozens of emails he'd received from employees thanking him for making it okay to be human at work. Maybe this wasn't about him at all. Maybe it was about using what he'd learned, what he'd survived, to create something that would outlast his own experience. He called Alexandra the next morning. "I'll take the promotion, but I need some conditions." "Name them." "The team I mentor has to genuinely want this kind of work-life integration. No one gets assigned to me who thinks flexibility is a weakness or that success requires sacrificing everything else. And if at any point this starts interfering with my ability to be present for Maya, we revisit the arrangement immediately." "Agreed. Anything else?" "Yeah. I want to develop a formal mentorship program, not just for strategic development, but for any employee trying to navigate major life challenges while maintaining their career. Structured support instead of people just suffering in silence until they break." He could hear the smile in Alexandra's voice. "I was hoping you'd suggest something like that. Draw up a proposal and we'll make it happen." The expansion of Ethan's role happened gradually over the following months. He began meeting virtually with 3 junior analysts who were working on long-term projects, helping them develop the kind of strategic thinking that had always come naturally to him. The mentorship program launched in February with 20 employees participating, people managing everything from aging parents to chronic illness to new babies. What surprised Ethan most was how much he enjoyed it. Not just the analytical work, which he'd always loved, but the human element, helping someone figure out how to structure their day so they could attend their son's soccer games. Brainstorming solutions for an employee whose mother had Alzheimer's and needed increasing care. March brought Maya's 8th birthday, and Ethan threw her a party in their backyard despite the lingering winter chill. Caroline helped him string up lights and set up tables, and a dozen of Maya's classmates ran around playing games and eating too much cake. Emma's mother showed up for pickup and found Ethan cleaning frosting off the patio furniture. "This was quite the production," she said, her tone making it unclear whether she was impressed or critical. "Maya deserves something special. I'm sure it's nice having all this time to plan parties and such, working from home." There it was again. The subtle dig implying his work wasn't real because it didn't require a daily commute in business casual attire. Ethan could have let it go. Should have, probably, but something in him was done with people dismissing what he'd built. I work from home because my company values results over FaceTime, he said calmly. I'm director of strategic innovation at Tech Vanguard Industries. I develop long-term growth strategies and mentor other employees. I also walk my daughter to school every morning and read her bedtime stories every night. Those aren't mutually exclusive. They're integrated parts of a life I'm pretty proud of. Emma's mother blinked, clearly not expecting the pushback. I didn't mean to imply, yes, you did, and that's okay. A lot of people have outdated ideas about what professional success looks like. But maybe instead of judging other parents for their choices, we could celebrate the fact that we're all trying our best in different ways. After she left, Caroline came out from the kitchen where she'd been watching the exchange with barely concealed glee. That was amazing. The old Ethan would have just smiled and changed the subject. The old Ethan was too exhausted to defend himself. This Ethan has slept 8 hours a night for 6 months and has opinions about people who passive-aggressively insult his career choices. She laughed and hugged him. I'm proud of you, not just for standing up for yourself, but for everything you've built. Sarah would be proud too. The mention of Sarah's name still hurt, but it was a different kind of hurt now. Less like an open wound and more like an old injury that ached in certain weather. Manageable. Survivable. That night, after all the guests had gone and Maya was asleep in her bed surrounded by new toys and birthday cards, Ethan found himself in his office looking at the photograph of Sarah he kept on his desk. It was from their wedding day. Her smile radiant, her eyes full of joy and possibility. We're doing okay, he said quietly to the image. Maya's healing. I'm healing. It's not the life we planned, but it's a good life. I hope you'd approve. The photograph didn't answer, of course, but Ethan felt a sense of peace settle over him anyway. He'd spent so long feeling like he was failing Sarah's memory by not being strong enough to handle everything perfectly. But maybe honoring her memory wasn't about being perfect. Maybe it was about creating a life where their daughter could be happy, and their love could still mean something, even transformed by loss. April brought the final board presentation on the sustainability initiative. This time, Ethan walked into the boardroom with confidence instead of terror. He'd done the work. He knew his material, and more importantly, he knew these people respected him. The presentation was unanimous approval. Richard Paulson actually stood up to shake Ethan's hand. This is going to transform the company, he said. Mark my words. In 5 years, we'll look back at this moment as the pivot point that ensured Tech Vanguard's relevance for decades to come. Catherine Liu pulled him aside after the meeting. I've been in this business 40 years, and I've rarely seen analysis this thorough. You should be very proud. Alexandra walked him out, her expression satisfied. The partnerships are approved. We'll begin implementation next quarter, which means you'll be busier than usual for a few months. Are you comfortable with that? As long as I can still walk Maya to school and be home for dinner, we're good. Always. That's the foundation this is built on. In the elevator down to the lobby, Ethan caught his reflection in the polished metal doors. He looked different than he had a year ago when he'd walked out of this building with his belongings in a cardboard box. Less haunted, less desperate, more like someone who knew his own worth. The drive home took him through the city he'd lived in for over a decade, streets he'd driven 1,000 times. But everything looked different now. Brighter, full of possibility instead of just obligation. Maya was waiting for him when he got home, having convinced Caroline to let her stay up past bedtime. How was the big meeting? She asked, throwing herself into his arms. It went great. They approved my project. The one about saving the planet with technology? That's the one. I knew they would. You're the smartest daddy in the whole world. I checked, remember? He held her close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and the particular sweetness of childhood. This was what mattered. Not the board approval or the salary increase or the professional recognition, though those were nice. This. Right here, his daughter in his arms, safe and loved and growing into someone remarkable. Summer arrived with the kind of warmth that made everything feel possible. Ethan's sustainability partnerships were progressing ahead of schedule. The mentorship program had expanded to 50 participants, and Maya had finished second grade with glowing reports from her teacher. She's come so far, Mrs. Peterson told him at the final parent-teacher conference. The anxiety she was struggling with at the beginning of the year has diminished significantly. Whatever you're doing at home, it's working. What he was doing at home was being present, reading stories, listening to her worries, walking her to school, making pancakes on Saturday mornings, being the steady, reliable presence she needed to feel safe enough to heal. It wasn't complicated. It was just consistent. One evening in July, Ethan and Maya sat in their backyard watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. She'd been unusually quiet all day, and he could tell something was on her mind. "Daddy, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you think Mommy would be happy with how we're doing?" The question caught him off guard, but he considered it seriously. "I think she'd be incredibly proud of you, of how brave you've been, how you've kept going even when things were really hard. What about you? Would she be proud of you?" Ethan thought about the past year and a half, about walking away from the job that was destroying him, about accepting help when his pride wanted to refuse it, about building a life that prioritized presence over productivity. "I think she'd be proud that I finally figured out what actually matters. She always told me I worked too much, that I was going to miss your childhood if I didn't slow down. I wish I'd listened to her sooner, but at least I'm listening now." Maya leaned against him, her small body warm in the cooling evening. "I'm glad you're here, Daddy. Not just home, but really here. You used to be home sometimes, but you were always looking at your phone or thinking about work. Now when you're here, you're really here." Out of the mouths of children came the most devastating truth. She was right. He'd been physically present but emotionally absent for so long that even a 7-year-old could feel the difference. "I'm glad I'm really here too," he said softly. "And I'm going to keep being really here, I promise." They sat in silence for a while, watching the fireflies and listening to the distant sound of neighbors talking over fences and children playing in yards down the street. Ordinary life, beautiful in its ordinariness. "Daddy?" "Yeah, baby?" "I think we're going to be okay. Like really okay, not just pretending okay." Ethan felt tears prick his eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, I think we are." August brought an unexpected visitor. Ethan was working in his office when the doorbell rang. He opened it to find Alexandra standing on his porch, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "I hope it's okay that I stopped by without calling first. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd take a chance." "Of course. Come in. Can I get you some coffee?" "That would be lovely, thank you." They sat in his modest living room, the same room where she'd stood a year and a half ago and offered him a second chance. Maya's drawings still covered the walls, though they'd evolved from simple stick figures to more complex scenes showing her growing artistic skill. "I wanted to talk to you about something," Alexandra said, cradling her coffee mug. "Not work-related, personal." Ethan waited, surprised. They'd developed a good professional relationship, even something approaching friendship, but Alexandra rarely discussed anything truly personal. "Do you remember when I told you about my brother David?" "Of course." "What I didn't tell you is that I've barely spoken to my parents in over a decade. After David died, I blamed them for not seeing how much he was struggling. They blamed themselves too, and instead of grieving together, we all just scattered, each of us dealing with it alone." She set down her mug with trembling hands. "Watching you rebuild your relationship with Maya, seeing how you chose presence over career advancement, made me realize what I'd lost. Not just David, but the rest of my family too. I've been so focused on building this empire that I forgot I was supposed to be building a life." "Alexandra, I called my mother last week. First time in 8 years. We talked for 3 hours. Her voice broke. She cried. I cried. "We have so much damage to repair, but we're going to try. Because of you, Ethan. Because you showed me that it's never too late to choose what actually matters." Ethan felt his throat tighten. "I'm glad. Really glad. Everyone deserves the chance to reconnect with the people they love. I wanted you to know that the changes at Tech Vanguard, they're not just corporate policy, they're personal for me. Every employee who gets to be present for their family, every person who doesn't have to choose between their career and their life. That's me trying to make sure other people don't make the same mistakes I did." "You're doing good work, Alexandra. Really important work." She wiped her eyes and managed a smile. "We both are. Partners in the revolution of actually treating people like humans." After she left, Ethan stood at his window and thought about the strange chain of events that had brought them both to this point. How his crisis had sparked her awakening. How her willingness to change had created space for dozens of other people to find balance. It was like dropping a stone in water and watching the ripples spread far beyond the initial impact. September arrived with Maya starting third grade and Ethan celebrating 1 year in his current role. The sustainability partnerships were exceeding all projections. The mentorship program had become a permanent fixture of Tech Vanguard's culture, and Ethan had been featured in a Business Journal article about innovative approaches to work-life integration. But the moment that mattered most came on an ordinary Tuesday evening. Ethan was helping Maya with her homework, a family tree project that required her to write about people who were important to her. She'd drawn a tree with branches extending in all directions, each one labeled with a name. At the very top, in the biggest letters, she'd written Daddy. Below that, Mommy, in heaven. Then branches for Caroline, her grandparents, her friends, her teacher, her therapist. But what caught Ethan's attention was the trunk of the tree, where Maya had written in her careful third-grade handwriting, "Our family is strong because we love each other, and we're always there when it matters." "Is that okay, Daddy?" Mrs. Martinez said we should write something true about our families. Ethan couldn't speak for a moment. He just pulled her into his lap and held her close. "It's perfect, baby girl. Absolutely perfect." That night, after Maya was asleep, Ethan sat in his office and reflected on everything that had changed since that rainy afternoon when he'd walked away from his old life. He'd been terrified then, convinced he was making a catastrophic mistake. But walking away had been the beginning, not the end. It had led to Alexandra's offer, which had led to the sustainability project, which had led to the mentorship program, which had led to company-wide cultural changes that were now affecting hundreds of employees and their families. One decision, made in desperation and exhaustion, had created ripples that extended far beyond what he could have imagined. His phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. "Drinks this weekend? Haven't seen your face in person in way too long." Ethan smiled and typed back, "Saturday afternoon work? I've got Maya until 3. Perfect. See you then." Saturday afternoon found Ethan at a coffee shop near his house, chatting with Marcus while Maya was at a birthday party. They caught up on work gossip, shared stories about their kids, and talked about the changes at Tech Vanguard. "You know, people call it the Cole effect," Marcus said. "The whole cultural transformation, like you're personally responsible for the company becoming humane." "That's ridiculous." Alexandra made those changes. "Because you showed her why they mattered. Don't diminish your impact, man. You fundamentally changed how this company operates. That's not nothing." "I was just trying to survive." "And your survival became a blueprint for everyone else. That's the definition of impact." Walking home after coffee, Ethan thought about Marcus's words. He'd never set out to change anything beyond his own circumstances. But sometimes survival itself was revolutionary, especially when you were willing to be honest about the cost of not changing. October brought cooler weather and Maya's fall dance recital. Ethan sat in the audience watching his daughter perform, remembering the recital he'd missed 2 years ago because of a meeting that had seemed crucial at the time. He couldn't even remember what that meeting had been about. But he'd remember this performance forever. Maya's concentrated expression as she executed the choreography, the pure joy on her face when she spotted him in the audience, the way she ran to him afterwards with her arms spread wide. "Did you see me, Daddy? Did you see my solo part? I saw everything. You were magnificent. I didn't mess up once, not even a little bit." She hugged him tightly, and Ethan felt a sense of completeness he hadn't known was possible after Sarah died. His life would never be what he'd originally planned. He'd always carry the grief of losing his wife, always wish Maya had grown up with both parents. But this life, the one he'd built from the wreckage of his previous existence, was good, really good, full of small joys and meaningful moments, and the kind of presence that couldn't be measured in performance reviews or salary increases. That evening, tucking Maya into bed, she said something that would stay with Ethan for the rest of his life. "Daddy, remember when I used to be scared all the time? When I thought you might disappear like Mommy?" "I remember. I'm not scared like that anymore. I know you're not going anywhere." "What changed?" She thought about it seriously. "You did. You used to always seem worried and tired and far away. But now you're here, really here. And when you're really here, I feel safe. Ethan kissed her forehead, his eyes wet with tears he didn't bother hiding. I love you more than anything in this entire world. I know, Daddy. I can feel it. After she fell asleep, Ethan stood in her doorway watching her breathe. This small person who'd been through so much and somehow remained full of light and hope. He thought about the man he'd been 2 years ago, drowning, desperate, convinced that asking for help was failure. That man had thought strength meant enduring anything without complaint, that good fathers sacrificed everything for their children's material security. But real strength was knowing your limits. Real love was being present, not just providing. And real courage was walking away from what was killing you, even when you had no idea what came next. Downstairs, Ethan made himself tea and sat at the kitchen table with a notebook. He'd been thinking about writing down the lessons he'd learned, not for publication but for Maya, something she could read when she was older and facing her own impossible choices. He titled it simply, Things I Learned from Falling Apart. The first entry, sometimes quitting is the bravest thing you can do. The second, asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. The third, success without presence is just expensive loneliness. He continued writing until the tea grew cold and the house settled into its nighttime quiet. Page after page of hard-won understanding, purchased with pain and panic, and the slow, difficult work of rebuilding from scratch. When he finally closed the notebook, it was past midnight. But Ethan felt more awake than he had in years, more alive, more certain that the path he'd chosen, terrifying as it had been, was exactly the path he'd needed to walk. His phone buzzed with an email from Alexandra. Board-approved expansion of mentorship program to all divisions. Your proposal for dedicated family support staff was unanimously supported. This is becoming the new standard for how we operate. Thank you for showing us the way. Ethan read the email twice, then set his phone down and looked around his small, imperfect kitchen. Dishes in the sink, Maya's artwork on the refrigerator, coffee maker ready for tomorrow morning. The ordinary debris of a life fully lived. This was it. This was what winning looked like. Not the corner office or the impressive title, though those had their place. Not the recognition or the professional validation, though those felt good. The real victory was sitting right here in his kitchen at midnight, knowing that tomorrow morning he'd walk his daughter to school and she'd feel safe. That he'd work on projects he believed in without sacrificing his humanity. That he'd tuck Maya into bed tomorrow night and she'd know, really know, that her father was present and accounted for. Everything else was just details. Ethan climbed the stairs to his bedroom, pausing at Maya's door to watch her sleep one more time. Her face was peaceful. The nightmares that had once plagued her now rare visitors instead of constant companions. They were going to be okay. Better than okay. They were going to be happy. And on the worst day of Ethan's life, when he'd stood in the rain with a cardboard box full of belongings and no idea what came next, he would never have believed that happiness was still possible. But it was. It always had been. He just needed to let go of everything that was killing him to find it. The next morning brought another perfect autumn day. Ethan made pancakes while Maya told him about the dream she'd had involving talking dinosaurs and a magic treehouse. They walked to school together through streets painted gold and red with falling leaves. At the classroom door, Maya hugged him extra tight. Love you, Daddy. Love you too, baby girl. Have an amazing day. You too. She ran into her classroom, backpack bouncing, and Ethan stood there for a moment watching through the window as she joined her friends. His daughter, healing and whole and happy. Walking home, Ethan thought about the question Alexandra had asked him almost 2 years ago, the one that had started everything. Are you still committed to your position at Tech Vanguard? He'd answered by quitting, convinced he'd failed some fundamental test of professional dedication. But the real answer, the one he understood now, was that he'd never stopped being committed. He'd just finally gotten his priorities straight. Career success without personal fulfillment was hollow. Professional achievement without human connection was meaningless, and no job, no matter how prestigious or well-paid, was worth losing yourself in the process. Ethan had learned those lessons the hard way. But he'd learned them. And now he got to help other people learn them too, hopefully with less pain and panic than he'd experienced. Back at his desk, Ethan opened his laptop and started working on the next strategic initiative, The morning passed in focused productivity, the kind of deep work that was only possible when your mind wasn't constantly fragmented by guilt and exhaustion. At 3 o'clock, he closed his computer and went to meet Maya's school bus. She came running down the steps, full of stories about her day, and they walked home together hand in hand. Perfect ordinary. Beautifully mundane, exactly what Ethan had been fighting for all along. That evening, after dinner and homework and the usual bedtime routine, Ethan stood at his bedroom window, looking out at the quiet street where they lived. Same modest house, same small yard, same neighborhood full of people living their own complicated lives. Nothing extraordinary from the outside. But inside these walls, inside this life he'd rebuilt from the wreckage of loss, was everything that mattered: love, presence, connection, hope. The courage to fall apart when falling apart was necessary, and the grace to be caught when he did. Ethan thought about Sarah, about the life they'd planned together that would never exist. He'd spent so long feeling like her death had destroyed everything. But maybe destruction was sometimes necessary. Maybe you had to break completely to rebuild into something stronger. He'd never choose this path if given the option. Would give anything to have Sarah back, to raise Maya together, to grow old alongside the person he'd loved most. But since that wasn't possible, he'd built something else. Something different, but still good. Still worth having. Still full of light. And tomorrow morning, he'd wake up and make pancakes and walk Maya to school and work on projects that mattered and be present for every moment of his daughter's childhood. Not because it was easy, but because he'd learned, finally, painfully, completely, that presence was the only thing that actually counted. Everything else was just noise. Ethan closed the curtains and climbed into bed, exhausted in the good way that came from a day fully lived. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to navigate. But tonight, right now, everything was exactly as it should be, and that was more than enough. It was everything.